The scene shifts to another place where Mr. Clump appears with an impolite smile, his teeth straight and white like some shameless man. "May I ask you to dance?" he says. His demeanor is that of a creep, which scares the nearby blonde girl, causing her to scream and run away. This scene takes place 40 years ago at a party hosted by some family. It's the middle of the party during the dance, and Mr. Clump has no one to dance with. A young man with blonde hair approaches Mr. Clump and teases him. "I told you to find a dance partner, but why did you scare everyone off?" Clump responds, "Yes, yes." Clump, sounding jealous, says, "Your hair seems even nicer than mine. If you keep your hair long and dress well, you'll be fine." Back then, long hair was in style. That was when Mr. Alfus was young. His good looks drove all the girls crazy. Mr. Clump doesn't look too happy about that, huh? Meanwhile, Mr. Alfus, noticing the nearby voices, turns around. "Oh, is that a woman's voice? Hello, I'm Arina." Nearby, a woman in a turquoise evening gown had been rejected by the young man when she asked him to dance. "Sorry, I'm a little busy." "Huh, why is he avoiding her? She's beautiful too," Mr. Alfus wondered. Mr. Clump, still angry, explained, Well, she's the eldest daughter of the host of this party. It seems like she's dealing with some issues. She's an aristocrat. What kind of issues?" Mr. Alfus asked, surprised. "Don't tell me you came here and don't know anything." Mr. Clump replied, frustrated with Mr. Alfus. Mr. Clump then seriously explained the situation. "Right now, she's not very smart. When she was younger, she had an accident, and because of that, her mind stopped developing at around age 10. Usually, the head of the family doesn't let her leave her room, but today he hasn't stopped her." Mr. Clump stood there, trying to explain it all to his friend, while an older man nearby scoffed at the girl. She's really a disgrace to the family. Mr. Alfus quietly thought to himself, just like those old men in my own family. "Oh, Arina loves parties, so maybe he should tone it down a bit." Suddenly, thinking of aristocrats, Mr. Alfus quickly started to move away. "I'll help her restore her reputation," he declared, making Mr. Clump panic and try to stop him. "What? Wait a second," Mr. Clump said, worried. "You're going too far. Pitying her is just going to make her look even worse." Don't worry. I've never been fake with any noble lady," Mr. Alfus said confidently. "Hey, you jerk, are you serious?" Young Mr. Alfus approached where Miss Arina was sitting and started a conversation. He bowed politely. "Good evening, beautiful lady. Tonight is as lovely as you are." The sudden appearance of young Mr. Alfus startled Arina. "Hello, I'm Arina." "Huh?" That's not the response I was expecting. Outside, a few people whispered as they saw young Mr. Alfus trying to talk to Arina. "What's he doing with that poor girl?" "Don't tell me." Young Mr. Alfus forced a natural-looking smile and tried to continue the conversation. "I was wondering, would you be willing to join me as a companion for the evening?" As soon as young Mr. Alfus finished speaking, Arina suddenly burst into tears and screamed. "Mom!" It left him frozen in shock. Young Mr. Alfus was in big trouble now after his careless attempt. The scene shifts to 3 years ago. Under the night sky, light rain was falling in the dark forest. At this moment, Aruki stood in the rain, speaking to the person in front of him. "What the hell are you doing? Are you just going to stand there and do nothing?" The person in front of him didn't speak, just stood there. Along with the rain, loud thunder rumbled overhead. The flashes of lightning lit up the area where both of them stood. Aruki kept a cautious eye on the person in front of him, not wanting to give him a chance to act. The person standing in the rain had green hair. It seemed like the person was just standing there, not doing anything. If possible, Need was sweating, feeling anxious. Suddenly, Aruki spoke up first. "Hey, Need." Need understood right away. He didn't need Aruki to say more because he already got the message. It seemed like these two were pretty in sync, so Need ended up saying the same thing Aruki was about to say, while also keeping an eye out for what was happening around them. "You're telling me to be careful, right?" Haruki didn't answer. He just glanced at his friend, lost in thought. Exactly. In front of them was a man holding 2 sharp swords, slowly closing in with a smile twisted into something sinister, his eyes filled with malice. A heavy killing intent radiated from him. "You brats." He made his move, quickly shifting as if he was teleporting toward them. No matter how cautious they were, escaping this was impossible. He was already above them, both swords crossed, ready to strike with full force. Aruki and Need were caught off guard by how fast he moved, and both had to pour magic into their legs. Just as he swung his blades, they managed to jump out of the way, narrowly avoiding the red streaks of deadly energy from his swords. He gritted his teeth, laughing as he cursed them. Little brats! His eyes were filled with murderous intent. The diagram technique, in theory, allowed the user to enhance their entire body, but boosting just one part randomly could throw the user off balance. That's why those who used it often reinforced their bodies in specific ways called patterns. The mitochondria sample is a sample focused on the mitochondria, also known as the cell's power plant, which powers them up. It's the most common sample, and it's also the fastest. He moved, causing his position to be under pressure, making the ground crack in large, circular shapes. He shot forward, chasing after Iruki. When Needs saw the danger as the guy got close to Iruki, he shouted and gathered lightning energy, sending it toward Iruki. Iruki, be careful. A flash of lightning. The lightning attack passed right by Iruki, stopping the man from getting any closer, forcing him to pause for a moment. Iruki took that chance and struck back at him. There was an explosion. The two of them worked so well together that it caused an explosion, making the guy fall back, thinking to himself, look at this. These guys are definitely just rookies who've never faced anyone who used a battle diagram before. The smooth teamwork and quick reactions of the two of them made him grimace in frustration. Need used lightning magic to surround himself and move quickly to get closer to Iruki to assist, both of them keeping a careful watch on the crazed battle diagram user and looking for a way to deal with him. He somewhat complimented the two of them, but they do work well together. He continued to back away, dodging Need's lightning-based attacks. The two of them were tense, worried as he kept evading their strikes. Damn it, how is he so hard to hit? This is even harder than that speed shooting test. He kept rolling and retreating, dodging every attack, thinking to himself, the tissue sample is draining too much of my strength. I need to finish this quickly. He kept pushing the tissue sample to stimulate his muscles and increased his speed, aiming to end the fight as fast as possible. After enhancing himself, his body became even quicker, moving forward, speeding up his metabolism to double the rate. He moved so fast that he was already behind Iruki before the latter could react. Iruki panicked, realizing it's too late. He's already behind me. Behind him, and with a single slash, blood was spilled. At the same time, in a place shrouded in darkness, drops of blood fell to the ground. Nearby, a pair of glasses lay next to a pool of blood. Ethella was shackled by dark chains, her surroundings a suffocating black void. Her body was ragged and covered in wounds. She was gasping for breath, and blood was trickling from the corner of her mouth. Someone's voice was speaking to her. I'm really impressed by your persistence. But a figure in black was using the dark chains to lift her up. An old dark sorcerer was floating in the air, chanting an incantation, casting a large dark magic curse. He spoke, "It's time for you to die." As soon as he finished speaking, he launched a powerful magic attack mixed with deadly poison toward Ethella. Luckily, she was still alert enough to dodge, narrowly escaping death. She quietly sensed the magic strike that had just come at her. Was that poison? If I had been hit, death would have been certain. Ethella braced herself, preparing to strike back. She screamed and unleashed a powerful sound wave attack in retaliation. Her attack was strong enough to break through the dark barrier in front of her. The old sorcerer had to raise one hand to shield himself from the incoming wave. He couldn't help but quietly marvel at her attack. A shockwave strong enough to shake the spiritual field. This is the scream of a demon. By the time he realized it, Ethella's sound wave had already shattered the dark barrier and made a large hole in the wall. After the attack, Ethella could now see her way out. She quickly gathered her strength, broke free from the chains of darkness, and flew toward the opening in the wall. Now, outside the dark spiritual field, she had made it out. Even though Ethella had sustained some injuries, she had still managed to escape. Hovering in the air, she glanced back at the dark field, thinking to herself, when it comes to spells, I can't compare. I need to. Ethella seemed to have another plan to face the old dark man. She slowly pulled back the magic surrounding her body, switching to a different strategy, shifting to a close combat style of magic user. Her body was now surrounded by a red aura. She took a defensive stance while still floating in the air. On the ground, the position of the magic field trembled at the spot where Ethella had flown out. Boom! A massive dark creature suddenly tore through the magic field from the inside at the gap where Ethella had exited. A giant shadow beast appeared, smashing the dark magic field apart and sending debris flying in all directions. Ethella was also caught off guard by the appearance of such a huge monster. The beast swung its massive arm, aiming a punch at Ethella, who was still in her defensive position. The old dark man stood on the creature's shoulder, looking impressed after Ethella broke free from his chains. Oh, a magic user who fights with a battle diagram. If that's how you want to play, then I'll do the same, he said. He soared into the air and commanded the beast to prepare to attack Ethella. After barely managing to block the beast's surprise punch, Ethella was forced to retreat a bit. She was furious at the old man. Gritting her teeth, she prepared to charge into battle against the giant creature. She gathered her internal energy and charged forward, just as the shadow beast launched its punch toward her. On one side, the force of her internal power propelled her forward, while on the other, the shadow beast's powerful punch collided with hers. The impact between them created a violent shockwave in midair. The scene shifts back to 40 years ago during the Bastard family's banquet. Arina's voice drew everyone's attention. They were shocked, unsure of what was happening, and turned to look toward the source of the scream. Mom, Mom! Young Alpheus was startled by Arina's reaction. Arina, why are you doing this? She turned pale, terrified, and explained quickly. Mom said anyone who tries to talk to me is a bad person, so I. Hearing this, young Alpheus was dumbfounded. I'm a bad person just because I wanted to talk to you. Wait, look me in the eye and talk to me calmly. He was at a loss for words. How can you say something so ridiculous? The people around them started to whisper. Is he bothering the host's daughter? A tall man with long hair wearing a blue nobleman's outfit named Sarov spoke up, his face pale. This crazy guy trying to get famous by bothering the daughter of a respectable family? The whispers grew louder. The young lady is scared. Somebody stop him. Arina, still in a panic, rejected young Alpheus' attempt to talk to her. I don't want to. I'll get scolded if I don't listen to Mom. No, I can't make Mom angry. I need to go back to my room quickly. She trembled, her eyes watery, almost on the verge of tears. Young Alpheus thought to himself, no, it's not me she's afraid of. She's scared of being punished. On the other side, the crowd was still whispering and gossiping. The butler was calling for the guards to come protect and arrest the person who had been harassing the young lady. Young Mr. Clump stood there, anxiously worried about his friend. You're an idiot. Why did you have to stick your nose into someone else's business? Apologize quickly and get out of here before this turns into a bigger mess. Suddenly, young Mr. Alpheus shouted, spinning the panicked Lady Arina toward him, surprising her. Arina, he spoke softly and gently to the tearful young lady. Now you're looking at me, Lady Arina. What are you afraid of? No one ever gets scolded for dancing at a party. You didn't do anything wrong. Young Mr. Alpheus smiled kindly and explained carefully, trying to calm her down. Don't you want to dance a little? Lady Arina had calmed down by now, and in her eyes, a gentle young man with blonde hair appeared before her. You should try it. It's so freeing. What do you think? The image of the ballroom, with everyone dancing, flashed in her mind. Everyone looked so beautiful. Young Mr. Alpheus smiled, extending one hand to her in a polite invitation to dance. Shall we dance together? At this point, Lady Arina was no longer panicking. She looked at the young man in front of her with more composure. She gently lifted her hand to his. Her face now glowing with a shy smile flushed slightly. She felt happy, as this was the first time someone had invited her to dance like this. Before, she always had to be the one to ask, but no one ever agreed to dance with her. The grip between the two of them, held from both sides, felt completely natural now. There was no tension at all. The moment when the massive fist of the dark creature collided with Ethella's energy, a deafening sound filled the air. The forces clashed, compressing into bursts of glowing energy that radiated outward. Dust and debris swirled around as the dark creature staggered back. At that moment, many smaller dark creatures, shaped like black spiders, charged forward. As Ethella landed, she saw them rushing toward her, and she thought, is this really the dark magic I know? Before she could catch her breath, she immediately pushed off the ground and launched herself forward, throwing punch after punch like a storm of blows. The old dark sorcerer hovered in the air above, with the giant creature standing still beside him. He watched the scene below, a satisfied grin spreading across his face. Ha ha ha, her punches have some power, don't they? He stood to the side, watching the battle unfold while commenting on it. But Ethella showed no signs of hesitation. Each punch she threw took down one of the shadow spiders. At that moment, the massive dark creature raised both arms high, preparing to strike. It slammed down with incredible force, shattering the ground into jagged pieces. Rocks and dirt flew in every direction, but Ethella managed to quickly dodge, narrowly avoiding the attack. The old sorcerer raised his fist again, his smile turning darker. With a motion from him, the giant shadow creature threw another powerful punch, but Ethella quickly evaded it once more. She continued dodging its strikes, moving with lightning speed. I don't need to think too much, I just need to focus on taking it down. Using a brief moment of avoiding the creature's attacks to get closer, Ethella countered, landing blow after blow to its chest. Each punch that landed created waves of golden shockwaves. The old dark man sensed the electric current surging through him. He furrowed his brow and laughed, thinking, a lightning strike, huh? An attack capable of destroying a person from the inside out. The continuous pulses of lightning will disrupt the body's circulation, and the impact for its shockwaves will multiply by 10, even 100 times compared to a series of regular shockwaves. As the lightning shockwaves hit his body, the old dark man laughed out loud, his eyes gleaming like those of a monster. Crazy, he shouted wildly. If only you focused on your training, you could have stood at the top of the world by now. Instead, you waste your talent just to search for the truth. He kept speaking relentlessly. Ethella lost her balance and fell. Below her was a writhing mass of dark spiders. The spiders started crawling over the body of the giant dark beast. But it was all pointless. As soon as the old man finished speaking, his massive hand, covered in dark spiders, reached out toward Ethella, who was floating in midair. A bug struggling to fight against me is nothing compared to my grand plan to dominate the world, the old dark man said arrogantly, looking down from above. The giant fist of the dark beast shot toward Ethella like lightning. There was a loud crash as the punch slammed into the ground, sending rocks, dirt, and plants flying everywhere. The old dark man looked up in surprise. At some point, Ethella had appeared in midair above the head of the giant dark beast. She thought to herself, if someone like him were to enter the academy, no, just entering the city would be disastrous. I have to stop him, even if it costs me my life. Ethella plunged down from above, her body poised for combat, ready to strike. She was like an arrow, filled with immense energy, shooting straight toward the enemy. With a swift movement, she unleashed a powerful attack, summoning a lightning spear. Following that, a series of lightning strikes continued to rain down relentlessly. The massive dark creature let out a horrendous scream. Seizing the moment, Ethella quickly pulled back. The dark old man, struck by the lightning, also howled in pain. So that's it. He saw Ethella above, frowning as she looked down. All of the previous attacks had just been a setup for this final move. He raised his hand as if reaching for something, but in that moment, his hand shook violently. The immense pain overwhelmed him, and then his hand clenched into a tight fist. His stone-like face twisted in agony as he screamed. I remember now. The memories flooded back of the time when he fought alongside other talented warriors of his era. Following his movement, the dark creature also raised its hand, punching forward, aiming directly at Ethella. She frowned in surprise, gritting her teeth and tightening her fists, bracing for the blow. The dark old man let out a triumphant shout, his colossal fist aiming right at Ethella. She immediately blocked the strike. Feeling the overwhelming power of the creature's punch, Ethella put all of her strength into blocking it. Was the lightning spear not enough after all? I thought you would be stronger than this, master. The impact from the blow was overwhelming. A huge explosion rang out, sending rocks and dirt flying and leaves scattered everywhere. On the other side, blood sprayed out, followed by a loud scream, Iruki. Ni, using one hand to gather energy, tightly gripped his other hand. Are you okay? He asked. Iruki pressed his hand against the wound on his chest to stop the bleeding, quickly answering Mead. Just a scratch, he said, grinning, his glowing eyes looking ahead. Good job, Mead, he added. Looking at the blue lightning bolts attacking the man holding two swords, he was jolted by the electricity, his mouth falling open in shock. He cursed inwardly. That damn green-haired brat. He pretended to attack, but in reality, he was covering the whole area with a magnetic field. The scene from earlier flashed in his mind. To stop me, Mead's power was still holding him back, and Iruki had quickly joined the fight. Gritting his teeth, he launched an attack toward the enemy. A burst of green fire-like energy fell onto the enemy's head. His eyes widened in shock as he gritted his teeth, struggling to rise. No way, I can't lose to these kids. Before he could finish thinking, a dark force suddenly wrapped around Need's leg. While attacking the enemy, he immediately sensed something was wrong. Ha! The energy gathering in his hand disappeared all of a sudden. Ha! Need was taken aback and turned to look. Why is it her? The black-haired girl gasped for breath, raising her hand to control the power that was stopping Mead. Damn it! Iruki realized the situation was going south and immediately attacked the swordsman with the two blades. He broke free from the restraints and quickly lunged forward, narrowly dodging Iruki's strike. In a flash, his sword slashed toward Mead's neck. He shouted, "This is all your fault." Need froze, staring in horror at the blade so close to his throat. Need! Iruki shouted in panic. A loud crash echoed through the air, but it wasn't the sound of a blade cutting into flesh. The group on the other side stood in shock, mouths agape, as two blocks of ice appeared, stopping the sword just inches from Mead's neck. Iruki couldn't believe it. He turned around and exclaimed, "Ice magic." Could it be that the guy with the two swords also? As he looked, he heard footsteps approaching the battlefield. A woman walked against the wind, and with each step she took, the ground froze beneath her. It was Sina. Elsewhere, a series of loud sounds followed one after another. Canis, racing ahead, called out, "Javi, what's going on? Answer me." Javi quickly responded, "I felt a huge shock coming from the mountainside." He glanced back. Arcane was using the shadow slave technique. That was the final move of his master. Could it be that Alfus has shown up? Canis didn't look back and kept running at full speed. Javi, following closely behind, glanced around as he responded, "If that's the case, it makes sense. Arcane will be here soon." Suddenly, an attack came flying at him. Javi raised his hand to block the strike. "We need to clear this place," he said. Behind them, Shirone was chasing after them, moving so quickly that he seemed like a blur. In the dense forest, two streaks of shadow, one golden and the other black, chased each other in parallel. Canis said, "That damn persistent guy, instead of getting stuck in the darkness and dying, he's blocking all our escape routes." Javi replied, "It's like we've been placed on a chessboard. We need to make a move." Canis slammed on the brakes with his feet. Javi immediately said, "Got it. I'm coming." Javi enveloped Canis with his presence while casting dark magic to attack Shirone. At the same time, he gathered energy in his palm, creating a blinding light, and moved forward without hesitation. Meanwhile, back at the mountain cliffs, snow was falling. "Are you kidding me?" The man holding two swords looked at the scene before him. Bang Hoen gasped. The old man's magic was broken. Behind him stood the girl with black hair. She thought to herself, "This is impossible. Only high-level cultivators or mages can break through the Abyss Nova spell of my master." Her face was a mixture of shock and confusion, unable to understand how a magic school teacher would do something like this. In front of her stood Sina. She was walking against the wind, and with each step she took, the ground froze into sheets of ice. "Miss Sina, thank goodness. You're awake." Need was so happy that he almost jumped in excitement. Aruki, still stunned, was watching the scene when suddenly Need's arm froze. He stared dumbfounded. "Ah, it's so cold!" Need exclaimed, immediately clutching his frozen arm, shaking with the cold. Aruki's face darkened as he looked at the person ahead, sensing something was off. She's still not awake. A lot of students are standing frozen, not moving at all, even though the snow is piling up on them. They just stand there, shivering. Sheets. Before I could finish my sentence, the sharp ice shot out. It slashed across the side of the guy holding two swords, making him cough up blood. "Hey, stop! Are you trying to kill all these kids?" He dropped to his knees, using one hand to hold the wound and stop the bleeding, while the other tried to grip his sword so he could push himself up. One of his swords had already fallen to the ground. As he looked at the figure in front of him, his face twisted with fear. Sometimes there are awful people like her, monsters who, even on the brink of death, can kill without hesitation, even if they're sound asleep. Sina slowly opened her eyes, a flash of light sparkling in them. Her expression was emotionless as she raised one hand and said, "Die." Could that woman really cast a spell on her? Damn it. Seeing how things were going, he immediately dropped the last sword and scrambled to his feet, turning to run. What good is all that billion-dollar property anyway? Blocks of ice kept appearing and he sprinted away, leaving only a trail of red behind him. "Shit, I'm so screwed." He gritted his teeth and yelled, but then his eyes widened and his pupils shrank. Huh? Time seemed to freeze and his body went completely still. Sina calmly raised one hand in front of her. She was about 20 years old, around the level of a 6th tier mage, with ice magic being her strongest skill. Absolute zero. She tilted her head back, raised her hand high, and a large ice tornado spun around her palm, pulling pieces of rock and small chunks of ice into the air. Beneath her feet, two swords were planted in the ground, and rapidly, chunks of ice formed around them, pinning the man down, preventing him from escaping. Slowly, the ice spread up his body, freezing his legs up to his thighs. It was truly a bizarre school. Everyone, from the teachers to the students, was as messed up as the next. In his eyes, the huge block of ice closing in on him was reflected. Lying on the ground, his legs frozen, the massive ice block hovered just above him. There was no way out now. Absolute zero. From above, ice chunks like meteors rained down from the sky, heading straight for the cliffside. The black-haired girl looked up, horrified by the falling ice. In that moment of danger, Need ran to her and hugged her to pull her aside. "Ah!" She looked at Need, who was on top of her, and asked, "What are you doing?" Need yelled, "Wake up. If this keeps up, everyone's going to die." As he spoke, his tears fell onto her face. Seeing Need cry, she panicked and said, I don't have enough time. I'll handle it." Iruki stepped in front of them and suddenly spoke up. Need immediately asked, "What are you planning to do?" Iruki frowned, not answering Need, and instead focused on thinking. "Ice? No. The weight of the ice block is about 15 to 20 tons. I need to break it into thousands of pieces." With that thought, Iruki lifted her head to look at the massive ice block, and a surge of power shot up to confront it. At the same time, she could predict the vectors of each shard from a single beam of energy splitting into two forces. Not a single mistake could be allowed. The two streams of power surrounded the ice and tightened, shattering it into countless pieces. As the small ice fragments flew toward them, the girl in Need stood frozen in shock. How is that possible? The huge ice blocks just shattered into so many pieces it looks like fireworks made of ice. Two students at the Magic Academy reached this level. Witnessing the scene, the two of them suddenly stiffened, realizing their current position was a bit off. "What did you just do?" The girl shoved Need, still with tears in his eyes, and yelled. "I was just trying to save you. I can do anything to you," he replied. "We're enemies. Why would I need you to save me?" She snapped. Then Need immediately retorted loudly, stopped complaining, and calmed down. "Do you want to kill all of them?" "I don't know." Her answer left Need pale and stunned. "What?" This is all for Canis. The girl lowered her head and said softly. A childhood memory flashed in her mind. Two thin children lying in the rain, the older brother trying to protect the younger one. Then she looked up, smiling, but tears streamed down her face. I don't care what happens to them. What the heck are you thinking? Need furrowed her brows, hesitantly asking. Suddenly a loud noise rang out, a blast from behind the girl. Need's mouth fell open in shock. The girl turned around and saw a foot stepping forward, blood dripping from each step, staining the ground. The girl's eyes widened and tears flowed continuously as she looked at the person in front of her. Ah, Canis, covered in wounds, stumbling closer, still clutching her stomach with one hand. Canis, the girl shouted. Chiron was deeply engrossed in reading, so focused on the book that it seemed like he couldn't tear himself away for even a moment. Chiron called his two friends, Need and Haruki, over. Hey guys, look at this. They're pulling their bodies closer to me. Huh? What's going on? The three of them stared intently at the book Chiron was holding, with Need asking in confusion. The principle of mass energy balance, Chiron answered. Exactly. Mass can be converted into energy. If that's the case, Haruki added, does that mean energy can also be converted into mass? With this idea, we could improve the photon cannon. Suddenly, Chiron exclaimed, wait a minute. His eyes unintentionally landed on a bold line of text. He told his friends that this formula wasn't just any theory. It was the name of a professor. Upon hearing that, both of them were shocked and exclaimed, really? The scene shifted, and suddenly, a stream of golden magic attacked from somewhere. Javi shouted angrily, that bastard! He added more force behind his attack. Canis, stunned, said, what? Don't tell me he's actually getting stronger in the middle of the fight. Chiron flew toward them at the speed of light, with golden orbs floating in the air around him. He grabbed one nearby, and his eyes sparked with powerful blue lightning. He threw it directly at Javi's position. Javi wasn't afraid at all. He laughed out loud, saying, impressive, huh? But you're still too green. Chiron responded bluntly and decisively, no. He then flew toward the golden orbs which were releasing blue lightning. Confidently, he remarked that it was just training. Javi, hearing this, was completely stunned. He froze for a few seconds, then slowly transformed into a defensive stance and said to Canis, I can't stop this. Run, Canis. Canis replied, no. If we run now, we'll lose our momentum. Canis then shouted, absorb the power of my will quickly. Javi calmly responded, damn, you're really rushing this. A fierce battle had taken place. The two sources of power collided with incredible force. The explosion that followed was massive. The blast left the girl with black hair in shock for quite a while. Slowly, she turned her face around. At that moment, Need saw the explosion and was struck with panic. He stared for a moment, then suddenly said, what's going on? Is that a photon cannon? Haruki, you're just as shocked as I am. A beam of light shot straight up into the sky as Need and Haruki discussed Chiron. It seemed like he had managed to apply the formula he had learned the day before. Chiron gradually descended back to the ground. Both of his friends rushed over, calling his name with concern. Chiron. Need noticed the injury on Chiron's arm. His face changed and his eyes filled with worry. He asked gently, are you okay? Chiron replied weakly, I'm sorry, guides. He looked up, his face showing the wounds he'd suffered, his eyes blank. I don't think we can win this. Need, seeing his friend in such a state, felt a pang of sympathy. You're comforting him? Why are you being so weak all of a sudden? Chiron responded, his voice barely audible. I'm serious. That person is incredibly strong. Haruki added, this is going to be really tough. Need looked at Chiron and said, even after improving it, the photon cannon is that powerful and still couldn't win. The two friends stared at Chiron, seeming to understand the weight of what he was feeling. They both realized that Chiron was probably carrying a lot of pressure. There are two bodies lying on the ground. Thoughts of Chiron constantly fill their minds. The only reason he spoke up was because we needed to handle things here. They encouraged him, saying, well done, Chiron. But he was sitting, panting heavily, his strength and spirit drained from the battle. Now we're all here together. Haruki stepped forward, standing tall, and spoke to Canis with strength. What are you going to do about this? On this side, Canis was exhausted, his energy completely spent. Haruki's questions kept echoing in his ears. Haruki spoke again. You think you can take 2 and leave 3? Admit defeat and spare the students. Need shouted in anger. No one is dead yet. It's not too late to surrender. Canis responded. The battle isn't over. My master will punish all of you. After hearing this, they all glared at him, irritated, and Haruki spoke first. Punish us? Haruki continued. Do you even realize what you've done? Canis replied. You can ask Alfus when you meet him in hell. Upon hearing this, all three of them were stunned. Haruki asked, the principal. Canis, still seething with anger, continued. He made an unforgivable mistake. This terrible academy was created after he stole it from my master. Everything you're using here was taken from my master. Chiron, after hearing his words, was completely shocked. His whole body seemed frozen, unable to believe what he had just heard. He shouted, "What the hell are you talking about?" Aruki, standing in front, warned the others behind him. "Don't let him fool you. Even if he's telling the truth, what wrong have we done here?" Canis narrowed his eyes, his gaze turning cold and threatening. Those details didn't matter. A powerful dark energy surrounded him. He spoke, "I represent my master, and I act according to what I believe is right." At this point, Need could no longer hold back. He yelled, full of anger, "You're not going to change anything. So are you saying this needs to end here?" Suddenly, Shirone stepped forward, shocking both Need and Aruki. He created a ball of light and held it up in front of Canis. Seeing Shirone about to use force against him, Canis didn't show the slightest fear. Calmly, he said, "You think violence will work better than words." He looked at Chiron with a smug expression, then sneered. "Even if you do, nothing will change." The creature Javi's massive hands slowly surrounded Canis. Canis looked up at Javi in confusion and asked, "Javi, what's going on?" "Don't be afraid," Javi replied. "This is dangerous. That attack is anything but normal. Don't tell me he—" Before Javi could finish, Canis interrupted. "What are you talking about? If you absorb enough of my power, we'll stop it." As soon as the words left his mouth, fear flashed across his face as he realized the power Chiron held. The golden orb in Chiron's hand grew larger and brighter with each passing moment. He held it out in front of them, his eyes filled with anger and coldness as he spoke. "This is your last chance. Release the students." Need and Aruki exchanged stunned looks, and the black-haired girl seemed just as panicked as the two of them. Canis yelled out, his eyes burning with fury. "I'm the representative of the Grand Sorcerer. Even if I die, his will not be shattered." Chiron shouted back, "I don't want to kill you. But if everyone dies just because of your faith." His eyes showed a fierce determination to protect those around him. He finished the thought he had left hanging. "Then I'll have to take you down." Somewhere a voice echoed, "The light is so beautiful." A beautiful girl appeared, her round hair tied up neatly. Her blue eyes made her face appear gentle and incredibly lovely. A man with blonde hair noticed her, and before he even realized it, he was already captivated by her. The two of them sat in a beautiful flower garden, gazing at the palace in front of them. Stars, fireflies, everything was enchanting. Yet the words the man spoke were anything but beautiful. The blonde-haired man looked nervous and uneasy as he hesitated before replying. "I understand, but why do you think the light is so beautiful?" She looked up at the starry sky and said to him, "Light helps us see in the dark." He turned to look at her. She was still smiling as she gazed at the sky and continued, "We can see the night because of the light, right?" A voice called out from somewhere, "I get it, my shadow." The young man's eyes sparked with blue lightning. Two streams of energy twisted around each other, but it wasn't opposing energy. "I get it now, I understand," the man exclaimed. "Is beautiful really beautiful, Arina?" It turns out the beautiful girl's name was Arina. She looked back at him, confused, and he spoke to her in a gentle tone. He knelt down on the beautiful flower-covered grass and confessed, "Will you be the light of my life?" The scene was breathtaking, unusually quiet. Pink petals floated up to the sky in a brilliant display. Thoughts filled his mind. How could I ever forget that day? The atmosphere of that evening, the stillness of the breeze, the scent of the grass, and Arina's beauty kept replaying in my head. That pure beauty, something I could never forget, no matter how the world changes. It's a memory I'll always carry. Those precious memories belong to the director. Back in the present, Thad was sweating heavily, his face and shirt soaked. The man pushed himself to the limit, using all his magic to try and rescue the principal from his own imagination. He seemed to be growing weaker, but he didn't give up. Thad thought to himself, the power of the light magic is too strong. He shut his eyes tight and thought, Victor Arcane. I can't believe he can cast a spell like this. Principal, please wake up. On Chiron's side, the sound of footsteps approached. He instinctively turned around and wondered what's going on. Chiron and Canis were both stunned by what was happening before them. Exhausted, Canis shouted, Master. A man with wrinkled skin and a long white beard stood high above them. Dark energy seemed to surround him. Canis yelled again, Master. The man's gaze was cold and full of iron will, his long white beard flowing down. He glanced downward. Below him, the body of a man lay motionless on the ground, surrounded by chunks of ice. Canis bowed his head in sorrow and said, I'm sorry, Master. He glanced at him for a long moment, then thought to himself, that idiot, right, of course. Then Canis's master looked down at Chiron, who was casting his spell. He thought quietly, so it was all because of that kid. Chiron shouted, his eyes full of anger, Are you the one who planned all of this? Nii and Aruki stared at his face, both looking slightly surprised. The man smiled a wicked smile, his face turning even more cunning. You're quite stubborn, aren't you? Then he asked him, What's your name? Chiron yelled, I'm not telling a murderer my name. On the other side, Canis and the girl with black hair both turned their gaze toward him. He began to give orders. Stop controlling my mind right now and leave this place. The man scoffed at that. He kept speaking. Sorry, I can't do that. He stroked his long white beard that addressed everyone present. All students of Alpheus must be punished. His eyes turned red, his face twisted with cruelty, and his words became chilling. And that includes you. The three of them were all horrified after hearing this, especially Shirone. Without hesitation, he threw a punch with all of his strength. His attack caused a huge explosion. Chiron was left utterly shocked and panicked. The smoke from his attack filled the air, swirling everywhere, but what was surprising was that the Dark Master remained unharmed. He stood on a nearby rock, calmly analyzing the attack. Within a radius of 52.7 meters, the energy from that attack was quite powerful, especially for someone of his age. The three of them couldn't help but express their amazement. Did he just dodge that? Chiron wasn't about to give up. He was preparing for another strike when a shout rang out. Stop, Chiron! They quickly turned toward the source of the voice and saw a woman stepping forward, clutching her injured arm. Chiron was shocked when he saw her. They all exclaimed in unison, Miss Ethella. The Dark Master glanced at them and said, You're still alive, and yet you're bold enough to show yourself. Since you're lucky enough to survive, go ahead and be embarrassed. She was covered in wounds, but she spoke sincerely. I don't care about winning or losing. I just want to protect my students. At that moment, Chiron, puzzled, asked, Miss, who is that man? Why is he doing this? Ethella's face grew more anxious, her expression frantic as sweat dripped down her face. She spoke through gritted teeth, her voice strained. His name is Arcane Victor. She continued, he's a third-level Grand Mage. Upon hearing this, everyone was stunned. It seemed like he really hated the principal. Arcane Victor, standing above, spoke up. How pathetic, complaining to his young students. Ethella's expression began to dull. She spoke to him with difficulty. You don't have the ability to take it easy like that. A number appeared, 10%. Canis seemed to notice something, and he thought to himself, the Master's mental power is only at 10% right now. Javi then said to Canis, even so, 10% from a Grand Mage is more than enough to wipe them all out. Canis responded, oh, we still haven't captured Alpheus. Just as I thought I should. Before Canis could finish his sentence, the black-haired girl next to him interrupted, Canis, what are you saying? Javi called out his name, Canis. His footsteps moved rhythmically as he stepped forward. He called out, Master. Canis confidently said, leave this to me. Arcane Victor slowly turned his head and looked at him with a sinister expression. Leave it to you. The black-haired girl gritted her teeth and thought, Canis, why? Why are you pushing yourself so hard? Arcane Victor narrowed his eyes, and a cunning, scheming smile spread across his face. So, kid. He then asked Chiron, you're Alpheus' disciple, right? Chiron answered firmly, don't address the principal by name like that. His eyes showed pure anger. Compared to the principal, he began to recall the happy memories he had when he was young, living with the principal. The principal had treated him so well. Then Chiron shouted in fury, a person like you doesn't deserve to be a wizard. Hearing this, the man laughed wildly. His laughter grew louder and louder. Arcane Victor laughed and said, Alpheus, after all these 40 years, how fake have you really been? Need and Aruki froze, staring at him. Arcane responded to Canis, all right then. He called out to him, Canis, fight that person yourself. Canis bowed deeply and expressed his gratitude. Thank you, Master. Ethella, over by the side, cried out, Stop, Chiron. The two of them faced each other, preparing themselves for battle. Javi reminded Canis, think again, Canis. It's better to leave this to Arcane. Despite the advice, he remained determined to stay loyal to his master. He thought to himself, I've already disappointed Master once. I must defeat that person, even if I have to die for it. They stared at each other, their gazes filled with fury. We will fight. Javi. Canis furrowed his brow. Javi, answer me. Javi. He felt as though he had fallen into an endless night with no way out. Then Canis charged forward like a gust of wind. I will still fight. Chiron had already taken his fighting stance with golden energy surrounding him. As Canis flew toward him, he was met with Chiron's golden attacks. He thought to himself, what is this? Coming down from a cliff, does he want to fight just to show off? Canis grinned wickedly. That stupid idiot probably thinks those shadows can't be used in midair, but the night sky is just one giant shadow. Chiron flew higher, the light from his body shining down, catching Canis off guard. The people below were just as surprised. The girl with black hair looked up with fear in her eyes, while Chiron hovered in the air. He silently thought, if I can't keep up with his movements, I'll just target his whole domain. Thousands of golden orbs attacked Canis before he could react. He quickly formed a shield to protect himself. The light from those orbs grew brighter and more dazzling. The night sky was filled with beams of power in every color. shining down on the darkened ground. The light pierced through the darkness, countless beams cutting through one after another. Canis tried to dodge, his teeth clenched in frustration. This guy tonight, he muttered, frowning as he calculated. None of them are fake. In front of him, Shirone was surrounded by a glowing web of light, leaving Canis stunned as he thought it over. Was Shirone really casting hundreds of spells at once, and were they all real? Shirone's face was covered in deep, bloody wounds, and his cold eyes glowed with a green light, which made Canis keep pondering. How could an amateur like him? Thousands of light beams from Shirone shot straight at Canis. Below, Ethella suddenly spoke up. When did Shirone get this kind of power? Even Aruki stood there dumbfounded. No way. He can't be like this. He's already entered the realm of the infinite. Suddenly, a voice came from behind, causing both of them to jump. What are you two talking about? Ethella spoke up, making both of them break into a cold sweat. Has Shirone really stepped into the realm of immortality? Then she looked up at the sky to watch the battle unfold. The two boys let out a sigh of relief. Above them, countless beams of light glittered, and Ethella thought to herself, this is the end. A dark shadow quickly slipped through the light beams, weaving around them. Canis shouted angrily, Havy. He glared furious, demanding, answer me. If this keeps up, we'll die. After a moment of distraction, Canis was caught off guard and hit. Panicking, he touched the wound but couldn't feel anything. Confused, he thought, am I not injured? What just happened? Looking up at the sky, he realized the attack hadn't been aimed directly at him. Shirone held the energy orb in his hand, ready to throw it directly at the spot where he stood. The orb flew toward him, his mind racing with thoughts. The darkness. He's completely eliminating the darkness I could use to teleport. He looked up nervously, his skin crawling. Was the psychic power of this lunatic bottomless? The blinding light hit him, leaving him feeling embarrassed and helpless. He didn't want to die in front of his master. His eyes began to lose focus, and his emotions faded away. He thought he was about to die when suddenly a wave of dark power surged through him. Anointing Arcane. In his mind, he questioned, Havy. The explosion that followed shattered the ground beneath them. Canis suddenly felt his energy surge. He screamed in pain inside, asking, Havy, why? Canis' body radiated dark power again. Havy, my psychic power. The darkness. Loud, stay awake and focus. From below, a shadow attacked Chiron, forcing him to dodge immediately. Chiron was stunned. What's happening all of a sudden? Two different forces were fighting fiercely against each other. Havy kept attacking relentlessly while Chiron dodged nonstop. He thought to himself, this battlefield is in my favor. Suddenly, he was struck in the arm. He winced in pain, watching blood gush out. He had been thrown off balance. He landed hard on the ground, the shadowy figure following him down, landing with powerful force. Debris flew toward him as he pressed his hand against the wound, gritting his teeth in frustration. Continuing to use the immoral jaw technique will be very dangerous. Wasn't Chiron's subconscious mind strange? His physical strength could withstand the explosion of light. As he launched another attack, he was also deep in thought. High intelligence, strong close combat skills, speed coming from agility. Suddenly, he realized something odd. He spotted a gap. Why had the enemy made a move from the start? Could it be? Did he just channel his magic into that monster? The image of the dark creature and Javi's sharp gaze flashed through his mind. Was it draining his mental energy? A piece of information passed through his head. Yes, we are a unified being. Ethella turned her head upward, grinding her teeth in disgust. Arcane, you really are a cruel person. Arcane shot her an angry look, his eyes flashing purple. She judged him coldly. To you, what are your disciples even worth? Meanwhile, Canis was in agony, causing Arina to worry and call out his name in distress. Arina rushed to Canis' side, shouting his name, but Canis was vomiting uncontrollably. Thoughts raced through his mind. Was the jar just there to help the creature move? Canis felt dizzy and whispered, Havy. The battle between the creature and Shirone was intense, neither side giving an inch. The monster roared. Shirone quickly launched himself forward, his mind racing as he calculated his next move. I understand now. If the enemy has changed, his eyes tightened with focus. I don't need to keep using physical attacks like the light cannon anymore. Without a moment's hesitation, he absorbed the magical energy from the shield above his head and gritted his teeth in frustration. He calculated the light cannon attack, and a massive burst of power flew toward the monster. It hit, and the creature howled in pain. Damn it! The monster, hiding in the cracks of the rocks, sprang out and unleashed a surge of energy. Chiron raised his hands to block it, tensing as he anticipated this move. Just as I thought, this won't be easy. Even though I have limitless mental power, I still can't break through my own limits. Suddenly, his pupils shattered, and he realized what needed to be done. The answer was all-encompassing. In that case, there's no choice but to raise my mental capacity to the highest level. A crack formed in his eyes, and energy surged with the mass of an object multiplied by the square of the speed of light. With all his strength, he launched his final blow. This time, I'll take all the mass and convert it into energy. The power shot toward the monster, leaving it confused. What is this? Before it could react, it was too late. The monster's body slowly began to tear apart. Immortal veins? The onlookers below were struck with awe and terror. Aaron, speechless, could only watch in disbelief. Arcane raised an eyebrow, clearly surprised. Each shouted, "What is that?" Aruki and Ethella were just as panicked. They spoke up. "It's a laser beam." Above them, Shirone was still trying to maintain her attack. The power source created a hole in the monster's body, which screamed in pain. The creature's body was swelling up, and I could feel myself being burned alive. Canis clutched his head, screaming. Aaron beside him kept calling his name. She felt that Javi's pain was being transferred to Canis. Javi had already reached his limit. Chiron held her ground with the attack. The monster was terrified. If this continues, we'll all be wiped out. The monster's body was boiling and small explosions were going off inside it. Ethella watched the battle anxiously. Arcane, on the other hand, watched smugly, unaffected. Ethella felt something was wrong and rushed to stop it. Chiron, stop right now. Chiron turned, looking at the cells in the monster's body swelling up, and yelled, "It's too late." Suddenly, there was a huge explosion that destroyed everything around them. "My name is Javi," he said. Turning back to Canis, the boy stood in front of Aaron, touching the glass. He spoke. "Javi, become my subordinate." The monster, trapped in the water tank, looked at the two children in front of him and asked, "Why?" Arcane, standing nearby, spoke up, "Don't you want Canis?" Javi shook his head. "That's not what I meant, but joining forces with Aaron would be more effective." He thought about Aaron for a moment, a hint of sadness in his expression before answering. "Arina has lived here for 10 years, but aside from Canis, no one has ever really met her. Yet, despite all the resistance, she has gained a high level of perception and can see things ordinary people can't." Arcane's malicious gaze said, "He's talking about the first elemental sigil, a unique mental process that allows one to perceive an object or entity as if encountering it for the first time, enabling someone to see the true form of that object or entity." Hadi looked directly at the old man, sensing the overload of Aaron's energy. "You just found her and brought her here, and you brought Canis too." Arcane quickly replied, "No." His face was filled with murderous intent as he spoke sharply, "Aaron is too gentle. You should merge with Canis." Deep down, Javi understood something. The floating droplets of water gave it away. "So, this was it? The reason you gave Canis to me in the first place. You were planning this all along." A minute ago, the explosion at the mountain's peak. The blast shot down toward where they were standing below, stunning everyone. Eren shouted, "It's flying!" The monster whispered in Canis's mind, "I'm about to explode." Canis weakly called out to Javi, "It regrets this. I'll destroy our contract." The surge of green power inside Canis erupted, causing him intense pain. With the golden monster hovering in the sky, only Canis continued to scream. "Javi, no. Why are you alone?" He remembered that day and answered Javi's question. "You're asking why I want power?" At that moment, his face hardened and his voice became firm. "Because Eren is the only light I have." His gaze was filled with certainty. "I have to protect them from this world." Javi let out a small laugh, his body expanding slightly. "Ha ha ha, you're an interesting one." Then Javi told him keep living and make him suffer by shouting loudly. At that moment, Arcane turned his head away, not wanting to look. Javi exploded, sending rocks flying everywhere. After the blast, everything fell silent. Chiron observed the dark silhouette, then spoke up. "You," he shouted angrily. "What have you done?" His teammates stood frozen in shock, and he continued, "Answer me." Arina, worried about Canis, quickly looked up in panic. "Are you planning to kill everyone here?" Arcane's face twisted with malice as he spoke, clearly enjoying himself. "Oh, that expression. No wonder you look so familiar," he mocked. "You're the mirror image of Alfus from 40 years ago." Chiron cursed with fury. "Shut up." Arcane laughed loudly, excited. "I know why that slay Alfus took you in." He continued mocking him. "You even have the appearance of someone with omnipotent light. Didn't he plan to use you for some wicked scheme?" Chiron snapped, furious. "What do you know?" At that moment, the old man replied with a solemn face. "I know. The person you admire, Alfus, was once my student." As soon as he finished speaking, the young man froze. "What?" Arcane stood on the cliff, looking down at everyone receiving their praises. Alfus was very smart, and he was happy to have taught him. The old man looked at his scarred, burned hand, then grimaced with hatred. "He threw me into the hellfire and destroyed everything I had worked for in my life. I did everything I could to help him, but his wife died for nothing." Everyone was shocked, clearly surprised. Principal, what are you talking about? Ethella stepped forward. Tell us more. Arcane gazed up at the sky. This happened 40 years ago, he said, his voice deep in thought. Shirone listened carefully. Returning to Alfus, he was sitting in a chair, with Thad trying to perform magic on his head during a particularly remarkable period of time. The old man closed his eyes and relaxed. A voice echoed through Alfea's life. This year's Golden Circle Magic Award goes to Murray Alfeas. At that moment, he was thrilled, raising the trophy high as his friends applauded. Murray Alfeas, the award is given to the mage who has made the most outstanding achievement of the year. The Golden Circle medal shone brightly as his colleagues surrounded him with praise. Alfeas, you're a genius. Who would have thought that light could be both a particle and a wave? When you become famous, you won't forget us. You're the light of the Murr family. His best friend hugged and kissed him in excitement. Alfeas, my dear friend, and I always thought you were just a troublemaker. Never imagined you'd pull something this big off. You know we have to celebrate, right? Of course, but let me get home first. As they walked through the town, a group of elegant horses passed by. Alfeas, holding his reward, rushed to open the door and called out, Arina. The girl, peeking out from the kitchen with a ladle in hand, smiled brightly and said loudly, We're home already, my husband. He quickly approached her and proudly pinned the badge on her. This is for you, the golden magic ring. Look, it has the Empire's seal on it. Arina smiled through happy tears, beaming with pride. It means the whole world recognizes your ideas. Congratulations, congratulations, my love. He scooped her up in his arms and said, Since there's a celebration, I need to go, so. She looked surprised. What? What do you mean? He carried her upstairs, ignoring whatever she said. My love, the bread is going to burn. Let it burn, I'm about to catch fire myself. At 23, Alfeas became the most famous wizard on the continent. He received offers from all over the world. Nobles sent him invitations, but Alfeas didn't prioritize personal gain. He carefully selected the offers he accepted. Thanks to his abilities, his value continued to rise. However, both families still opposed their marriage. Every morning, Arina stood in front of the house to see him off. Alfeas sat in the carriage, lost in thought. Just wait a little longer, Arina. I'll soon be the best, he reassured her. Alfeas stood in front of both families, smiling and speaking amicably. When the time came, both the Meyer and Bastet families were forced to acknowledge him. His smiling face appeared, they'll have to accept it. On his way to work, there were footsteps in front of his house. Dan, how did this happen? Sarov and two others were feeling confused. It would have been better if you made up sooner. Sarov scratched his head and replied, Who could have known it would turn out like this? Does Alfeas really have such a big influence? One of his friends wondered. But does Alfeas really live here? This is just a regular house, Sarov said regretfully. I should have brought a gift. He knocked on the door and said, It's okay. It's not like just giving him the gift and talking things over will fix everything. The door opened, surprising everyone. You're back? Husband? Arina shrank back in fear when she saw the group of men in front of her. Oh, you guys are. The group was left in confusion. Bastet, Arina? Threven forced a smile, feeling uneasy inside. This is definitely Alfeas' house, Sarov said, holding a hand to his chest as he introduced himself. We're friends of Alfeas. Is he home? Arina replied calmly, No, he's out. He asked again, Do you even know when he'll be back? The girl answered, I don't know. He hesitated for a moment, then the men in front of her chuckled awkwardly. Would it be all right if we wait inside for him? It's a bit much standing out here. Arina thought about her husband for a moment, then answered, Yes, please come in. As night fell, the house lit up. Alfea's voice echoed through the door. I'm home, Arina. Sorry I'm so late. He arrived at the door, calling her name into the darkness. As he slowly made his way to the lit room, he overheard voices. Alfeas, that bastard. He's so lucky. He froze in shock at the scene before him. The dining table was cluttered with wine bottles, and food was scattered everywhere. Sarov and his men were drunk, laughing and chatting loudly, while his wife stood in a corner, hands clasped, singing. He was just some guy who only knew how to flirt and date, hadn't written a thesis or anything, just got lucky and married into a good family. Hey, you're drunk again, one of them teased. Laughter echoed throughout the house. Sarov turned his head. I told you right, he said to Arina. Arina hesitated. I don't know. Sarov, still oblivious to the situation, casually added, Of course, you don't know. Go ahead, keep singing. One of his friends noticed something wasn't right and, without warning, threw a punch straight into Sarov's face. He made him put his head down on the drinking table. Alfeas, angry, cursed, Bunch of trash. His friend panicked shouted, Sarov. The girl who saw this felt scared. How could a cultured person use his fists like that? Sarov, wiping the blood off his hand, apologized. It's not my fault. I wasn't sober. His friend helped him up and said, I will never let you lose face again. Alfeas lost control and yelled at his wife. Why did you let them into the house? His wife, feeling wronged, replied, but they said they were your friends. He raised his voice. What kind of friends would insult your wife like that? Alpheus sobbed, tears streaming down his face as he said, don't you know what your husband's friends look like? You. He kept saying hurtful things. Are you really that stupid? As soon as he said that, Alpheus covered his mouth, hugged his face, and leaned against the wall, crying. His wife Arina stood there quietly, feeling sad about the guilt she had unintentionally caused. At this point, Alpheus had calmed down, but still had his back turned to his wife. He spoke, apologizing for the harsh words he had just said to her. I'm sorry. Just forget everything I said. In his mind, he was still thinking. Just because her intelligence was lower, it didn't mean her thinking was stuck at a 10-year-old level. Arina spoke up, her head lowered and eyes welling up with tears. I'm sorry, my love. I'll never do that again. Alpheus was still very angry, but the weaker side always has to give in. He left his wife standing there amid the broken things in the house and stepped outside to release the anger that was boiling inside him. I'm sorry, I just need to step outside for some air, he said, leaving his wife alone in the house, silent and with his head bowed sadly, as if he was holding back from confronting her. Alpheus went to a nearby bar to drink, hoping it would help him calm down. He took a gulp and slammed his glass down hard, shouting out his frustration. You piece of trash, I'm the real trash. I can't believe I said that to someone who only knows how to watch and follow me, he yelled. The young Mr. Clumph, sitting across from him, tried to comfort his friend. Hey, it's normal to argue sometimes. Suddenly, Mr. Clumph had an idea and said, hey, why not take this chance to have a baby? It'll definitely improve your relationship. Alpheus responded, it's not like I haven't thought about it, but just have a baby already. You absolutely need to have a child to make things stable, Mr. Clumph added. Mr. Clumph then proudly showed off a drawing of his family, the Ogent family. Alpheus looked at him and said, I know, but the doctor told me he doesn't know if someone with the mental capacity of a 10-year-old child could handle the pain of childbirth. Ha, Mr. Clumph sighed. I probably shouldn't say this, but you already know, right? From the moment you decided to get married, I knew I wouldn't regret it. But still, how could someone as smart as you act like this? You had no other choice. Had no other choice? Hearing Clump's words, Alpheus suddenly had a thought, and a spark of hope appeared in his eyes. The scene shifts to a dimly lit area, where the arm of an old man is writing something on paper, surrounded by the sound of earth and stone shaking. The old man speaks, not bad. Sometime later, after an intruder had entered the dungeon of the great mage Arcane, about 48 hours later, the old man returns to praise the one who broke in. You managed to make it this far, the door to the dungeon slowly opens and the intruder's footsteps are heard as they walk inside. As the intruder comes into view, it's revealed to be Alpheus. He's dragging his exhausted body, covered in bleeding wounds, as he steps forward to meet the great mage. With a weary breath, he asks, Are you Arcane Victor? Ho ho, I didn't expect you to come alone. The great mage steps forward to greet the intruder, surprised by the young man's ability. You made it through all the traps and monsters by yourself. Who are you? Alpheus, clearly exhausted, pulls something from his coat pocket. He speaks, introducing himself. My name is Alpheus Myrrh. I've read. He raises a blood-stained stack of papers toward the great mage for him to see. Seeing the papers, the great mage is equally surprised. The research thesis on restoring his memories. The grand mage smiled. How interesting. The genius behind the quantum light theory said, Myra of light, and yet you're interested in dark magic. I want to give you my memories. At this point, Alpheus was nearly exhausted, swaying and on the verge of passing out. He still made an effort to speak to my wife. He managed to say only this before collapsing from sheer fatigue, falling unconscious in front of the Grand Mage. The papers scattered everywhere because of this. After losing consciousness for a while, Alpheus suddenly woke up in a large pool of water, gasping for air. He had no idea what had happened or how he ended up there. His wounds were completely healed and he was fully recovered. Arcane was sitting and studying the papers Alpheus had brought with him. I've read the notes you wrote here. Fascinating. He was sitting in a chair, reading them carefully. You want to use the absorption ability of dark magic to store memories. On the other hand, you also want to use light magic to create a virtual nervous system, and then use that system to integrate and transfer the stored memories. You're combining the powers of both dark magic from the outside and light magic supporting the brain from within. It's a dual approach, both light and dark. You want to use the power of light to transmit information, don't you? Alpheus remained silent, simply listening. Meanwhile, the Grand Mage closed the stack of papers, lowered his glasses, and praised Alpheus' idea. It's truly an innovative and brilliant concept. However, this is about giving your entire life to someone else, and that's not going to be easy, not to mention the moral issues involved. The person in question wanted Alpheus to think carefully about his decision, but Alpheus didn't hesitate to respond firmly. Please accept me as your disciple. He stood up, immediately determined to follow through his decision. I will make this a reality. I want to protect my wife from this world. Arcane wanted to ask Alpheus something to be sure. Before you make your decision, I have one question. He straightened his face and asked, has your wife agreed to this experiment? Alpheus, standing across from him, didn't answer, but instead looked at the great mage with unwavering eyes. Earlier, his young friend Clump had been desperately trying to stop him from going through with this reckless plan. No, you can't. That person is a criminal. Why are you even looking for him? At Alfie's house, Clump slammed his hand on the table and shouted, you must be possessed. You want to transfer someone's memories into another person's brain? That's impossible. Alpheus turned away to avoid his friend's angry gaze. Clump, Arcane is the greatest scholar of dark magic on the continent. Even if you don't know that, yes, I'm a fool. Maybe I'm not as smart as you, but at least I still have some awareness. Right now, you're trying to throw away all the blessings you have. If you get involved with him, your position in the royal family will be taken away. Your family will disown you. Alpheus lowered his head in thought and said, I don't need any of that as long as Arina is happy. If I succeed, I'll be happier than I am now. There was a strong determination in Alpheus' eyes, a certainty about his choice. His wife, Arina, was completely surprised when she heard this and looked at him in shock. The happiness of her husband made her slowly close her eyes. I'll do it. I love you. Seeing that Arina didn't oppose Alfie's crazy idea, Clump was confused, wondering why she wasn't protesting. Arina, wait, this? No. Before Clump could finish his sentence, Arina spoke up. I trust my husband. She smiled and nestled into her husband's arms. Alpheus will make me happy. Of course, he's the wizard with the golden ring. He'll fix my weakness right away, and then I won't have to suffer those scornful looks anymore. Clump was stunned by the optimism of the couple. After that, Alpheus' family sold all their belongings and moved to the Arcane dungeon to live. In the dungeon, fully equipped with laboratories, Arina could live comfortably. Every week, Clump would visit to bring food for both of them. Since then, Alpheus had stayed up every night researching ways to treat his wife. Young Mr. Clump was always there to watch over Arina, who was lying in bed. The images of everyone in the dungeon appeared one by one. The Grand Mage Arcane with a worn-out face from Alpheus' research. Alpheus' wife Arina, whose eyes always showed trust in her husband, and young Mr. Clump, whose face was full of worry for his two friends. And so, 2 years passed. That day marked the final day of the research project to restore Arina's memory. Clump stood nervously beside Arina's bed, still trying to encourage her. After today, you'll have Alpheus' memories. You'll even know when he used to wet his pants as a kid, and when he first started checking out girls, he said, smiling anxiously. Arina just smiled softly from her bed. Alpheus approached her, gently stroking her cheek and comforting her. You go through so much. Now we can begin. Thank you, my love. What do you mean by that? I'm the one who should be thankful. Let's live happily together and have children. Arcane approached, calling for him. Alpheus this way. He was now in position, ready for the final step of the experiment. He thought to himself, magic technology, biological magic, alchemy, light magic, dark magic. We've used all the most advanced technology and the clinical tests showed no issues. The success rate will be 100%. He and his wife were both in place, their heads connected by countless wires to a massive machine. The process began as he flipped the switch to activate the machine. Immediately, the machine started to extract Alpheus' memories, causing him immense pain, and he screamed out in agony. Once the machine had extracted Alpheus' memories, it gathered them into one point before transferring them to his wife. It began to fill her mind with all of Alpheus' memories and emotions toward her. These emotions flooded her heart, pure and untainted, like when Alpheus smiled gently at her, brushing a tear from her eye with his finger. There was no deceit when he joyfully awarded her the medal. He placed it on her ring finger. They danced together, his arms wrapped around her. It was a moment of perfect harmony. All the images played out in her mind from the first time they met until now. When he smiled tenderly at her, that image slowly faded and disappeared. That was love. Thank you, Alpheus, my love. You've given me everything with such sincerity. I'm so glad I met you. Suddenly, the machine signaled an alarm. Something had gone wrong. Alpheus jumped up in a panic, leaping out of his seat and rushing to his wife. Master, how did the experiment go? Did our experiment succeed? It's perfect. However, when Alpheus reached the spot where his wife was lying, he saw that something was terribly wrong. Her face was turning pale. He started crying, frantic with worry, and asked, Arina, what's happening to her? My love, she whispered, holding his hand, and replied, the physical transfer was perfect, but the nerves in my body are starting to resist it. Tears were streaming down her face. Unlike animals, humans must still have something we don't understand. Clump, standing nearby, was frozen in fear, unable to believe what he was seeing. Alpheus couldn't understand where he went wrong, but he had achieved something incredible, hadn't he? If my research just a little more, and it would have. Don't say it anymore, my love. I'll redo everything. The pain was tearing through Arina's body from the inside, forcing her to scream. Alpheus watched helpless as his wife endured excruciating pain, crying his eyes out. I'm so sorry, my love. It's okay. Why are you apologizing? My love? Arcane felt overwhelmed. She couldn't bear to watch anymore, so she turned away, covering her face. Blood began to drip from her lips and her eyes started to close. Because you're so foolish. Foolish? No, you're the fool. You've been a fool from the start. He screamed in agony, his heart breaking. It's my fault, my love. Tears of happiness were streaming down her cheeks. Thank you. Even though it was brief, you showed me the world you live in a wonderful world full of logic. Thank you for letting me see it before I left. I love you. The desperate cries of Alpheus echoed through the dark dungeon. The unbearable pain of losing the one he loved most in this world. I was ready to do anything for her, and now I've lost the true love of my life. Arina. And so, the failure of the experiment took Arina from this world. Her funeral was held with family members in attendance, but Alpheus was not allowed by the family to participate. He could only kneel from afar, suffering in silence at the loss of his wife. They never registered their marriage or had children, so no one in the family acknowledged their relationship. Just like that, they were torn apart, as if they were strangers, separated by life and death. He knelt in a heavy rain, soaked to the bone, his face lowered, his eyes lifeless. On the day Arina died because of the experiment, Alpheus kept banging his head against the wall over and over again. Despite being stopped by both Clump and Arcane, he had become a madman, not caring whether he lived or died, relentlessly throwing himself into the wall. Clump's face was drenched with tears, his hands cradling his bleeding head. In his mind, the words kept echoing. How could this happen? Where there's light, there's darkness. Arina taught us how to see life. So why did we try to change who she was, making her leave him forever? What's wrong with us? I, the light of Myrrh, am nothing but Alpheus, full of arrogance. We dared to touch what's forbidden. Alpheus, you're back, he said. I'm really sorry about what happened to Arina. At that moment, the door to the research room opened and he walked in, speaking to encourage Alpheus. Now let's pull ourselves together, both mentally and physically, he said. We may not have figured everything out yet, but it seems there's still a chance. He made Arcane jump, holding a nearly empty oil bottle, with the last drop spilling onto the floor. Oh my god, he exclaimed. Arcane had no idea what he was planning to do with all the oil and the piles of scattered papers everywhere. Arcane, angry, shouted, What are you doing? Alpheus tossed the bottle aside and responded, Master, we shouldn't have done this experiment. After losing his love, he's completely lost his mind. Arcane raised his voice in protest. Get a grip. I know you're hurting, but this is only temporary. The experiment was a success. We can help people like Arina, people with mental problems we can't explain. Are you really going to let her sacrifice be in vain? Alpheus just laughed manically. Sacrifice? He said, his long hand forming a fireball with his magic. He dropped the fireball and a huge flame spread, consuming everything. Alpheus stood there, watching all their hard work and the master's efforts burn away, smiling like a madman. Everything happened so fast that Arcane couldn't do anything, only screaming in hopelessness. No, this research isn't just yours. It's the result of my lifetime's work, he said. All the documents quickly caught fire and were burned to ash. He raised his hand, trying to save them, but it was hopeless. Just like that, Alpheus turned his back and walked away, leaving everything to burn, including his own mentor. You? How could you do this to me? Everything was consumed by flames. The fire spread, swallowing the entire dungeon in a sea of flames. Back in the present, everything the old man had worked for was gone. He spoke up. Alpheus, that bastard, left me behind. You helped him both physically and mentally, letting him escape through the fire. Arcane stood at the edge of a cliff, looking back on that memory with anger. Not only did he abandon his mentor, but he also made his wife sacrifice herself for nothing. He had left behind thousands of people who could have benefited from that research. Below, Aruki, Need, Shirone, and Ethella all looked shocked by what the old man said about Alpheus. No way! The headmaster really did that? Chiron spoke up. The old man continued, Of course, I understand that he was in pain, but his actions were unworthy of a mage. He cast a cold, murderous gaze at those below. The reason I'm here today isn't just for revenge. It's also to make sure no mage with the same ideas as him ever exists again. Do you really believe he's a good teacher? The old man shouted. Aruki and Need stood tense, both on edge and afraid of the dark sorcerer. He was sly, arrogant, and impulsive. Ethella was stunned by his words. Arcane, furious, yelled, He's ruined the great cause of saving people. Someone like that. Before he could finish, Chiron spoke up from below, surprising everyone. That's right, Master's actions don't deserve to be called those of a sorcerer, he said. He bravely stepped forward to speak. Seeing this, he rushed to stop him, but a hand quickly held him back. It was Ethella. She held Need's shoulder, not allowing him to stop Shirone. From the perspective of someone who's been betrayed, I can understand where he's coming from. Shirone continued, taking a step forward. However, your choice was also wrong. What? The old man glared at Chiron. You're a grand sorcerer, and this is all you can do? He bared his teeth in a wide grin. It's because I have power. That's why I'm allowed to do this. The pressure from Arcane made the wind blow hard, affecting everyone and forcing them to raise their hands to shield themselves. He unleashed his power, causing the ground and rocks around him to crack and fly into the air as he said, "This is my judgment." He shot an energy beam that grazed Chiron's face, leaving a bleeding wound. So someone as powerful as you couldn't do anything but remain stuck in the past for 40 years, huh? Chiron's words only made him angrier. He shouted, "You talk so big, but in the end, all you feel is regret for that time, don't you?" Arcane glared at Chiron, then suddenly fell into deep thought, recalling the first time he met Alfie's wife. "It's a pleasure to meet you. I'm Arina. My husband owes everything to you." She bowed politely as she greeted him. "Welcome. Please make yourself at home." Arina turned to smile at her husband. "Do you live alone in this huge place, Master Mage?" Alpheus was caught off guard by his wife's question. Darling, this man is. She didn't pay any attention to her husband and kept smiling at Arcane. "Do you feel lonely?" she asked. Arcane was stunned by her question. The first time Arina looked into her eyes, she felt a sense of awe. In those eyes, there was an extreme purity, eyes that could face the deepest darkness, just like that. The light source that can dispel all the darkness in the world, I could feel that gaze from this young man. The old man saw the image of the small girl in the eyes of the brave figure standing before him. After a moment of deep thought, he suddenly let out a loud laugh. His laughter filled the air, making everyone standing below feel worried and afraid. The emotions of understanding and sympathy were clear in everyone's hearts. Yet, while these feelings are deeply human, when pushed to an extreme, they lose their humanity. The old man pressed his hand to his forehead, his laughter growing more and more mad. With his extraordinary insight that went beyond the ability to tell right from wrong, Chiron stood firm before the dark grand sorcerer without the slightest hint of fear. He stood there like a shining beacon in the dark night. "Chiron, is that you? You can predict cause and effect, can't you?" The old man, Arcane, maintained his stance and spoke. "It seems we will never be able to live in peace." He lowered his hand, revealing a cruel, piercing gaze. "You are someone who should not exist in this world." Suddenly, columns of darkness rose from the ground, surrounding everyone below, causing Need to panic. "What's happening? I thought he couldn't cast any more spells." The dark columns shot upward, converging into a sphere in the air. Chiron was worried that the old man might still be able to use dark magic again. How can you ignore the laws of fair exchange? Surprised, are you? The old man raised his hand high, his fist clenched. Arcane laughed loudly, full of confidence. That's the nature of magic, mysterious and unpredictable. Baruki stood below, looking up, her voice full of worry. "Holy shit, if that thing falls on us, we'll all be selling salt for a living." The dark orb sucked in the surrounding rocks and dirt, growing larger and larger like a meteor, hovering above everyone's heads. Canis lay unconscious, his head resting on his sister's lap. His sister, seeing the dark orb from the Grand Wizard, was also terrified. The orb kept growing, drawing in more dark energy and debris, getting bigger by the second. Suddenly, a beam of light from the Void Realm shot down, raking through the dark energy. The light shone brightly down near Arcane, dispelling the shadowy mist and illuminating the area. Everyone was confused, not understanding what was happening. The light from the Void Realm had completely shattered Arcane's dark orb. From the light, a figure stepped forward behind the Dark Wizard. It was Thad, followed by Alpheus. Everyone shouted in unison, "Headmaster!" Arcane turned around, glancing at the column of light with a slight grin on his face. The principal stepped out from the light, his face serious. Arcane stood with his arms crossed, dark magic swirling around him, filling the air. He looked at Alpheus with disdain. "You're getting old, Alpheus. I didn't think you'd fall for the memory seal spell so easily." Alpheus calmly replied to his old teacher. It wasn't so bad to remember the past. Slowly, the memories began to surface, and in the image that appeared, Arina's beautiful face shone. "I'm truly grateful," he said. Back on the battlefield, everyone had gathered around the principal and spoke up. "Principal." He turned to look at his students, their bodies battered with wounds. "I'm sorry. Thank you all so much for protecting everyone." Alpheus placed a hand on his chest and bowed his head slightly. "I'm glad that Professor Ethella was with you." "Thank you," he said. Ethella stepped forward, her body also covered in injuries. "Don't worry, sir. I feel guilty too for not being able to protect the students." Shirone ran up to the principal, wanting to ask something. "Principal, Shirone began, but Alpheus interrupted, asking about his condition. Your mental energy has fully recovered, right? Shirone was surprised that the principal knew about his situation. You knew? He asked. The most powerful spell that Mage Arcane created was the Abyssal spell, the one that controls memories. He smiled kindly and explained everything to him, piece by piece. When he erased the memory of using his own memory, he also temporarily regained his mental strength. So that method really does exist. Remember my words, Chiron, the principal said, gently patting his shoulder. If you don't have a trump card that can turn the tables in any situation during battle, you can't call yourself a battle mage. Alfus became serious and suggested, let us old men handle it. Don't do anything rude and let the kids go. All right, if my former student says so, then I agree. The old man responded with a mocking laugh. Letting them go is easy enough, but what will you do now? You can't be their principal anymore. Alfus scowled, irritated by his words. Hundreds of students here have heard all about your disgraceful past. Need and Aruki spoke up furious when they heard the dark man's words. You're the one who revealed the principal's past. You've been planning this all along. The old man Arcane continued taunting them, digging up unpleasant things from the past. What do you think about burning this place down to ashes like before? Alfika's furrowed his brows, clearly uncomfortable with the old man's attitude. This is not a joke. The old man stretched out his hand and shouted loudly towards the group of Shirones standing behind the principal, calling them over. Do you want to join me? We will perfect the research on memory implantation. I already successfully implanted my own memories. Look at this magical creature. This is Javi, the dark beast who once protected Canis with its own body. Now it's just a pile of mush. Canis, on the other hand, is severely wounded and unconscious, being cared for by his sister. This success is thanks to Arina's sacrifice. The mention of Arina struck a deep, painful chord, causing Althea's long-suppressed anger to explode. Sacrifice. He glared at the person he had once considered a mentor, recalling the moment when he stood face to face with Arcane, who was holding back the wall of fire. Master, this research is all your plan. What is it? Before starting the fire, Alfus had found a pile of dangerous documents. What exactly are you trying to create by taking away Arina's memories and that of the child? The old man was taken aback when he heard Alfea's words. He smiled bitterly, realizing that the secret behind the help of the person he had once called his mentor was now exposed. He held up the pile of documents high in front of him. Why are you creating hundreds of these magical creatures? Are you trying to conquer the world? Faced with the revelation of this secret, the old man became flustered and stumbled over his words. That's... The old man no longer hid his true nature and revealed his evil face, laughing loudly. Is it really that bad? When everyone learned the truth behind the events from years ago, they were all completely shocked. So, that was the reason you burned the research? I believe that the magical creature holds the memories of both Arina and me. Am I right? Hearing this, Aaron froze, sitting completely still. Arcane, furious, couldn't say a word as his actions were exposed. His attempt to implant his own memories into the creature had failed. In reality, it had taken the memories of Alpheus and Arina. Alpheus' voice echoed, revealing how far things had gone, and then it exploded. So it disobeyed your orders because it's just like me. From a distance, Canis' younger sister overheard everything. Don't tell me, it's you. Furious, she unleashed her power, draining the magical energy of the students around her. The dark power of Canis' sister exploded fiercely, causing Aruki and Need to turn around in surprise. Did you order Javi to self-destruct? Are you trying to kill all of us, including Canis? Her voice was filled with rage as tears still ran down her face and she screamed. Arcane, however, felt no fear. He simply bent down to shield himself, mocking her. Everyone here, slowly, he raised his old arm and pointed, completely uninterested in listening. He gathered a massive surge of dark magic in the pitch-black sky. It was coming. The massive dark meteorite was falling. Nii and Aruki looked up, spreading their legs apart in a stance, preparing for battle. The pressure from that thing was terrifying, blowing everything around it away. It was falling toward the area where students were already passing out. Over here, Shirone, Need, Aruki, Ethella, and Thad all shouted at once. Principal! The man yelled back, What's going on, Alpheus? Hurry up and run. Arcane laughed loudly at the chaotic scene, completely ignoring everything and running off on his own. Alpheus looked worried as he watched the man do that. The scene shifted to 10 years after Arina's accident and Clump's figure appeared. Are you going to die here, Alpheus? He looked haggard, his face worn out and lifeless. His beard was scruffy, and he was eating a meal. I've been through so much in these 10 years to find you. I've been to so many places and spent so much money. One day, I finally got a tip about where you were. Clump told the story of how he searched for his old friend. Alpheus interrupted him. Why did you come here? To meet someone as useless as me? Clump sighed and pulled something from his jacket pocket. I've got something to give you. The item he showed left Alpheus wide-eyed in surprise. You should have disappeared the day after. Clump was so emotional that he could hardly speak as he opened his wife's letter and began to read it aloud. This letter was meant for him from Alfea's, though it was hidden, followed by her heartfelt words. As he read it, he couldn't hold back his emotions. Tears fell onto the paper. It's because I wanted to conduct this experiment, he choked out, overwhelmed with emotion. If I had one last wish, Arina had written this letter to her husband while he was pouring all his energy into researching a cure for her. I would wish that you wouldn't be sad, but instead, continue doing the research you love. You are my eternal light. Let the world see that light. Alpheus, his voice thick with emotion, said to his friend, "Give me some money, Clump." He trembled as he spoke. "I will build a school so that people like me, fools, no longer exist. I will devote my entire life to this school." Clump sighed in relief, smiling because his friend had lost the pessimism he used to carry. He reached out as if trying to grasp that brilliant light, the life that Arina had allowed him to live. He had regained his strength. The light magic from Headmaster Alpheus illuminated the surroundings, making everything glow in the darkness of the night, a contrast to the dark magic of the old Arcane. This light touched everything, from the leaves fluttering in the wind to the students lying unconscious and even the dragonflies fluttering near the grass. Chiron watched in awe at the miracle that this light brought. Time seemed to slow down as the light magic in the headmaster's hands was surrounded by an infinite halo. The energy orb was pushed up into the sky by the teacher, creating a stunning sight that scattered the darkness covering everything. Shirone stood there watching as the light soared straight into the sky. Aruki and Mead also looked up. Canis' younger sister, who had been taking care of her brother, lifted her head to follow the light. The magic of Teacher Alpheus rose into the air and shone brightly. As the light broke through the dark mist, the full moon, no longer hidden by the fog, shone down. Old Arcane looked up in confusion, unsure of what had just shattered his dark power. "What is this? A spell called Big Bang." Teacher Alpheus, exhausted and panting after gathering so much energy for the spell, slowly explained. "Announcing that the magic I used only released harmless light feels a bit embarrassing, but I believe this parting gift is more than enough." Old Arcane slowly turned to look back and said, "I never expected this to happen. You prepared magic to fight against me, huh? You old fox." Suddenly, old Arcane lost his balance and collapsed to his knees. He placed his hands on the ground, coughing violently, blood spilling from his mouth. It seemed he had reached the limit of what his body could endure. Even though he could manipulate his memories to restore his mental strength, it was all just an illusion of the mind. If you keep pushing yourself like this, your brain won't be able to handle it. Your life will be in danger. You failed. So that's what it is. All these 4 years, you never took a break. After coughing and vomiting blood for a while, the old man gasped for air, exhausted. Arcane still struggled to speak. "You defeated the great mage Arcane. Your fame will spread even further." "Yes, this is something I never expected. Do you still not understand?" Teacher Alpheus stood in front of him and spoke. "You're no longer a great mage. 40 years ago you were, but enough time has passed for even a level 10 mage to drop to level 2. The world has changed and we're all getting old. How much longer are you going to chase after your childish ambitions?" The younger generation of mages stood behind Principal Shirone, Aruki, Nade, and even Thad. Even though he was coughing up blood, the old man still refused to give up. "You bastard, empty barrels make the most noise. You're not even a great mage anymore. You're not a genius or anything. You just know how to talk down to others." Arcane gritted his teeth and painfully stood up. He kept using dark magic to manipulate his own memories. "You arrogant little brat." He smirked arrogantly and unleashed even more powerful magical energy. Teacher Alpheus yelled in panic, "Have you lost your mind? Are you really trying to recover your mental energy like that? Are you seriously trying to kill yourself?" The principal's eyes were filled with fear as he looked at the scene before him. The dark tendrils of shadow twisted around the unconscious students, lifting them into the air. Arcane, now completely mad, was desperately using dark magic out of control. "I'll do whatever it takes," he muttered. He slowly began to rise into the sky to defeat you. Alpheus was terrified for his students, pleading with Arcane. Ethella and Thad were also deeply worried. "Please, spare the innocent," Alpheus begged. "Does winning really matter that much? Stop thinking like this. It's childish. Listen carefully. This is the last lesson I'll teach you. A sorcerer is forever a child." Arcane had lost all sense of humanity, laughing with sadistic pleasure as he pulled all the unconscious students floating in the air towards himself. The headmaster, seeing the situation spiral out of control, shouted, "Everyone scatter. Move as fast as you can." He stepped forward, urging, "Hurry, save them." The others quickly split up, flying after the students. Thad was flying at full speed, trying to catch up and save the students who were falling freely into the abyss below. He used all his strength to create a dome of blue light to catch them. Meanwhile, Need, Shirone, and Aruki were still trying desperately to dive down and rescue the others. Our teachers, who usually scold us in class, were now reacting differently. This is a literature test, not a math exam, they used to say. But now, their blood vessels were dilated, their faces flushed. When the blood flow shrank, their faces grew pale. Our friends, though they sometimes argue, envy, or even feel jealous of each other, were now all falling together toward the cold ground. Chiron stretched out his arm as far as he could, even as he was plummeting toward the ground himself, determined to save everyone. He screamed with all his might. Amy, the woman of his dreams, was also falling. The final destination was a cold emptiness of the soul. When she heard her name called out loud, she slowly woke up, opening her eyes while still free falling into the abyss. Who's calling me? Her voice sounded too familiar. It's me again. She was still drifting, floating aimlessly. It's me, Chiron. She saw someone rushing toward her. It's him. Chiron quickly reached out, pulling her out of the dreamlike state and waking her up. He had managed to grab her hand. Amy, Chiron. All she could see was Chiron in front of her. Chiron, are you crying? Chiron's face was filled with relief as he fought back tears, having saved Amy just before she hit the ground. When we meet again, let's compete fairly. The image of both of them flashed before them. From now on, don't call me senior anymore, because I've caught up to you. I don't think I can keep my promise. I'm sorry. What are you talking about? Amy was confused, not understanding what Chiron meant or what he was planning to do. Wait, Chiron, what are you going to do? What do you want? Thank you. Amy, no. Don't leave. He closed his eyes, tears still falling, which only made her more anxious. She rushed to embrace him. Chiron, goodbye, everyone. It seemed like he was planning to do something really foolish as he looked up. Suddenly, Chiron's entire body began to glow in the middle of the dark abyss. The light from his body gradually grew stronger, shining brightly over the entire area. The blinding light forced everyone to cover their faces with their hands. Arcane, after unleashing his dark magic for the last time, collapsed to the ground. With what little strength he had left, he managed to look toward the light. The light was accompanied by an infinite radiance shooting straight up into the sky. The brilliant glow reached all the way up, piercing the heavens. Gasping for breath, he murmured, "Is this what they call self-sacrifice? Truly, this world is so fascinating that even if we spent our entire lives wandering here, we'd never want to leave, would we?" Alfus. Those were his last words, spoken in his final moments. Arcane died, lying in a pool of his own blood. A shadow fell over him as someone approached, their voice filled with shock. "Master, do you think death is the end? Could you really just leave us like this?" Canis stared at the old man, his face haggard and full of pain, tears streaming down his face. He looked like a madman, crying out in agony. "I don't care whether you saw me as a tool or not. I just didn't want you to abandon me." Arina looked at him anxiously, worried as Canis was overwhelmed by his intense emotions. Canis continued, "But you know it already. It's all my fault." The dark magical energy once again enveloped him. "Please come back." Arina, standing next to him, couldn't help but feel extreme worry. She tried to reassure him in a calm voice, "Canis, it's not your fault, you." But Canis's desperate, agonized scream cut her off, drowning out her words. "It's all my fault. Everything is my fault." A sharp, cold voice suddenly interrupted, "Yes, it's all your fault." Both of them instinctively turned toward the source of the voice. On the ground, amidst the slimy liquid, Javi spoke coldly. "If you hadn't messed everything up, Arcane would still be alive, and he would have protected us." He continued, his tone emotionless. "But now he's dead, and we'll all follow him." Canis's face hardened, a dangerous gleam flashing in his eyes as he glared at Javi. "What's the matter?" Javi taunted. "If I say it's all your fault, what's going to change?" His dark, monotonous voice echoed in Canis and Aaron's ears as their gazes once again locked on their master. Arcane just lived his life to the fullest. He's already fulfilled his wish. Both of them stared at the old, wrinkled face of the arcane man. Javi spoke. He left in peace. Now he's gone. "What do you want to do?" he asked. Canis' gaze flickered slightly. "My wish," Canis said slowly, standing up. "I've already told you I still have the power to protect Aaron, so if someone dies here, it'll be a huge problem." He stood tall and firm, unwavering. "I accept the pact." Arina, with tears welling up, quickly protested, "Canis, you won't be able to handle it with the little mental energy you have left. Let me do it." Javi coldly interrupted her. "Sorry, but no. My master is Canis." The certainty in his tone left Aaron speechless. A slimy liquid began to slowly appear on Canis's face. Javi said, "If you ever betray me again," he warned, "I won't forgive you." With those words, a dark force poured into Canis's body, powerful and relentless. Javi teased, "Heh, I remember now, master. I like your arrogance." At that moment, Canis' body fully absorbed heavy into it. As he gradually lost his strength and instinctively leaned back, gentle hands reached out to support him. Erin carefully pulled Canis into her arms, tears flowing down her face. Let's create our life together. Principal Alfus quietly observed the two from a distance. After a long pause, he finally spoke. Professor Ethella, I am a sinner. Ethella, standing beside him, replied, taking the first step toward atonement, acknowledging her own guilt. She slowly continued. Alfus turned to look at her, but Ethella spoke with seriousness. You are no longer proud. A gentle smile appeared on his face. Ha ha, I will accept my punishment. Alfus looked at the two young professors in front of him, but more importantly, where was our hero? He couldn't hide his joy. He hadn't expected the young man to teleport more than 400 people at once. Alfus turned back and said, impressive. His words were suddenly interrupted by a loud scream. Help! The sound, coming from a girl holding a boy, quickly drew everyone's attention. People rushed toward the two of them. Amy, panic, shouted. Chiron, he's not breathing. Terror and fear filled her tear-filled eyes. After the arcane treatment was completed, it took 8 hours to bring all the students back to the dorms. The sealed memories would gradually return, but until then, the school would remain closed. At the infirmary, Amy, Need, and Aruki were all with Shirone. He lay motionless on the bed. Amy couldn't stop sobbing, clutching his hand tightly, while Need sat next to her, his face pale. Off to the side, Aruki quietly leaned against the wall, observing. Tears streamed down Amy's face. She gritted her teeth, silently blaming herself. I'm so stupid. That day, I didn't even recognize him when he came looking for me. And yet, Amy recalled the moment they first met in the dark alley, their encounters and arguments at the academy, a fake supernatural threat that had scared them. And the letter. I never even apologized. Amy's small frame trembled uncontrollably as she sobbed quietly, her head resting on the bed. Shirone remained motionless, and seeing Amy in such a fragile state, Need couldn't help but worry. Amy, you need to rest. If you keep this up, you'll get sick. Magic couldn't kill the caster themselves. She cried harder, gripping Shirone's hand and refusing to let go. Why did he have to die after using that wide area teleportation? Something strange is definitely going on with Shirone, Amy said. Need, though tears were still streaming down her face, managed to keep her composure and replied, You're right. Chiron will definitely wake up. If not, Haruki's cold voice interrupted their conversation. That means there's still a chance that magic could have killed the person who cast it. Need glanced at him and Haruki continued, Arcane also died after using magic. Amy stubbornly retorted, Arcane died because the energy in his brain was completely drained. But Chiron is in this condition because she fully unlocked her immortality. Those are two different things. Haruki, indifferent to Amy's emotions, responded flatly, It doesn't matter whether it's because he drained the energy in his brain or because of immortality. Knowing why won't change anything. What matters is that Chiron is already dead. He spoke coldly, his sharp gaze directed at both of them. Need immediately reacted, Haruki, you? Amy, who hadn't realized when she stood up, glared at him. You're such a jerk. She locked eyes with Haruki, her face twisted in anger, radiating a dangerous aura that made the atmosphere tense and heavy. So you really think Chiron is dead, don't you? I don't, Haruki replied nonchalantly, but she's dead. Without saying a word, Amy grabbed him by the collar with incredible strength and effortlessly lifted him off the ground. Chiron is in this condition because she saved us. And yet you, Amy's voice trembled with anger. She clenched her fist, ready to strike Haruki. Amy's hand tightened around the collar of his shirt as she raised her fist to strike Haruki's face. But unlike Amy, whose emotions were driving her actions impulsively, Haruki remained calm, staring at her clenched fist as it neared his face. Suddenly, Amy's hand froze, hovering just centimeters from his nose. Haruki's expression remained unaffected, as if nothing was happening. He casually tilted his head to the side and said, Ha, that's a relief. Amy, more enraged by his nonchalant attitude, clenched her teeth. You knew I was going to stop, didn't you? She spat, her voice trembling with fury. Do you know why I stopped? She glared at him, tears once again streaking down her face. Because someone like you doesn't deserve to have friends. Need, standing to the side, watched in shock and concern as the scene unfolded. Haruki immediately shouted back, refusing to back down. Then use your brain. His heart stopped, and he's already dead. In that moment, he was like a wild animal, fiercely retorting to Amy. Find a way to bring him back from the dead. You're just being pathetic and rambling. Amy's eyes went wide, frozen by Haruki's blunt words, while Need behind him fell silent. Magic couldn't bring the dead back to life. Haruki. The words have only made Haruki's cold gaze even more menacing. His brows furrowed deeply. He roughly shoved Amy away from him without a mercy, saying, That's the limit of human beings. After a tense silence, the room was left with only Need and Amy. Need spoke up. "You could get in if you want." Amy wiped her tears, her voice trembling. "How could I do that?" She weakly lowered her head. "He's a friend of Chiron." In the dark hallway, where only a faint moonlight filtered through the window, Aruki stormed off, his anger burning inside. "They're pathetic." "You're right, they really are pathetic, aren't they?" A mysterious voice suddenly echoed through the hallway. Iruki shot a cold glance toward the source of the voice. "You guys, how dare you come here?" He stared directly at Canis and Aaron, who were casually standing by the window. "We just came to offer our condolences." "He didn't die fighting me," Canis replied, leaning against the wall. "And it's a shame he died after saving you all. But honestly, I've lost interest." Iruki's face darkened immediately at his words. "Oh, you're right, they're pathetic," Canis repeated. "They're making such a big deal out of whether someone is really dead or not." "Don't you think so?" Canis's words only fueled the fire of Iruki's anger. "You better pray Shirone is still alive." The sudden change in Iruki's tone left Canis and Aaron looking somewhat confused and uneasy. In Iruki's eyes, a hint of green flashed as he unleashed his magical power, because the only person in the world who could stop me was Shirone. A powerful surge of magic surrounded Canis from head to toe. Heavy's low voice echoed, reminding him, "Canis, you've been locked on." Canis broke into a cold sweat. "Oh," but Heavy continued, "It's dangerous. His calculation speed is unnaturally fast. If he uses that spell, he says it will wipe out everything here." At first, a flash of light appeared in front of Canis, and then, unexpectedly, it exploded from a corner of the hallway, with the blast radius expanding to cover the entire building on campus. A deadly silence enveloped the dark hallway as both sides stood motionless, eyes locked. "Javi, how can his calculations be so fast that you're saying this place will be erased?" Canis asked, curious. Javi answered slowly, keeping it simple. "It's fast enough to analyze everything happening in this city within 3 seconds." Canis stared intensely at a spot without blinking. "I don't know," Javi replied, still looking at Iruki, who stood perfectly still in front of them. "But what I am sure of is, his brain cells can't hold up much longer." As soon as those words left his mouth, Iruki shifted into attack mode, his eyes flashing with waves of magical energy. "If Shirone has to die like this," a determined glint appeared in Iruki's eyes, "I'll definitely kill you all." On the other side, Canis' body remained stiff under the magical pressure. "Fall back, Canis," Javi urgently warned. "He'll explode the moment you step into the spirit realm." Just as he was unsure of what to do next, another voice immediately interrupted. "But that means..." Canis glanced at Aaron behind her, her voice trembling slightly. "You don't actually think Shirone is dead, do you?" Iruki slowly raised his hand. "You better be careful with your words." He extended his hand forward, ready to cast magic at any moment. Canis panicked and quickly tried to stop her. Arin. But Aaron ignored her and continued moving forward. "I can't see the condition of objects," she said, "but I can see inside people." Iruki roared in fury. "So what?" The situation was so tense that Canis couldn't help but scream. "Aaron?" Aaron ignored the warning and continued, "If you really believe he's dead." Iruki's face grew darker, a deadly glint flashing in his eyes. The feeling was so intense it felt like thousands of knives were piercing through the air toward her. Arin, on the other hand, instinctively covered her face, her eyes filled with fear and confusion, as tears flowed uncontrollably down her cheeks. There was no way. He couldn't possibly be crying, his face full of terror like that. Arin was stunned, staring at Iruki standing motionless, surrounded by streaks of dark red light mixing with shadows. For a moment, Iruki unconsciously glanced behind him, toward the room where Shirone lay. He then retracted his magic, stopping his movements. In the stillness of the night that covered the academy, only the full moon shone brightly through the darkness. Back in the infirmary, Neeg had fallen asleep against the wall, exhausted from watching over Shirone. Amy had also dozed off in the chair. The school would fall into chaos in a few days. Iruki spoke, his voice low. He approached Shirone's bed. It would be too late if they held a funeral now. His eyes lingered on Shirone's face, as if he were sleeping peacefully, before shifting to the sharp blade he held. "If you don't stop me, I won't be able to move forward." A vivid memory resurfaced in Shirone's mind as he held Iruki's hand and said firmly, "If that happens, I will stop you." Iruki raised the knife in his hand and continued, "That's why, Shirone, I will save you." He lowered the blade towards his arm. Iruki hesitated for a moment as he felt the tip of the knife touch Shirone's skin. Without a second thought, he pressed the blade down firmly into the flesh. At the Alfus Academy of Magic, students were required to live in dormitories. Since the academy served as a place for the children of high-ranking nobles in the kingdom, the security of the school was of utmost importance. However, the academy had been infiltrated by 4 attackers whose identities were unknown, as a male professor slowly explained. In the end, the attackers were dealt with, and the boy managed to save both the students and the professors. The remaining professors in the council fell into a deep silence as the male professor continued recounting the story. But sadly, the academy's brightest star, Shirone, had passed away. The principal of Alfus maintained a calm expression as he listened to the professor. If the outside world learned of this, the academy would not be able to avoid responsibility for such a serious matter. A male professor wearing glasses immediately stood up and intervened. We need to hold Chiron's funeral as soon as possible. He continued, we have to notify his parents. Another male professor across the room responded, do you think we don't know that? Chiron's friends are insisting on holding the funeral for him. The professor continued, his body is still in the infirmary, not the morgue. I can't understand why they're doing this. That's easy for you to say, an older professor with gray hair spoke up. But in reality, you were just trying to delay things so the school's reputation won't be affected. Other professors on the opposite side quickly protested. How can you say that? Another professor added, I'm saying we need more time to think. The professors on the side of the glasses-wearing and gray-haired professors continued to argue. The longer we drag this out, the worse public opinion will get. Forget about the school's reputation. The school could even be shut down. We need to act fast. We don't even know where Arcane's disciples are. The debate between the two sides failed to offer any solution, leaving the professor with glasses and gray hair anxiously glancing over at Headmaster Alfus. Headmaster, please make a decision the student council, summoned today, urged. This is no ordinary student council. She spoke again. If the children of the most prestigious noble families accuse the school, then we won't be able to do anything. Headmaster Alfus calmly replied, I'm the one who suggested we wait. He looked down at the council with a serious expression. His words made the professors exclaim, Headmaster. In the meeting room, he remained silent, watching as the two sides continued to argue and clash. As the professors had said, the situation would only worsen if they kept waiting. But an even more important question lingered, one that overshadowed the school's future. Alfus remembered, one by one, the images of Chiron using magic to save everyone at the academy, and the image of him lying motionless in Amy's arms. Had Chiron really died? He placed a hand over his chest where his heart beat. Am I thinking clearly about this? Or have I convinced myself that Chiron is special? Both Professor Thad and Sano lowered their heads in silence amidst the council's argument. Alfus thought to himself, sometimes I ask myself that question, but those vague feelings just won't go away. His eyes glinted with a golden light as he thought about it. Immortality, a realm that was completely unknown to them. Ethella spoke clearly. In this battle, Chiron had made an extreme decision to unlock her immortality. The room quickly fell silent as the professors listened to her words. Normally, this phenomenon would be defined as nirvana. Ethella explained nirvana is a state different from life. So, just because she has reached nirvana doesn't mean she's dead. Some of the professors in red robes looked confused. I don't understand, one of them said, even scratching his head. This is a magic academy, not common sense. The silver-haired professor stood up and looked up. I understand what the headmaster is saying. It's possible that Chiron, the one who unlocked it, is still alive. She continued, I completely understand. However, there's no guarantee that the girl will wake up. While we wait for Chiron, not knowing when she'll come to, we might have to face the worst-case scenario. Headmaster Alfus quickly interjected. And what would that be? The professors in red robes looked at him, horrified. Of course, the worst-case scenario would be that the academy would be shut down. Alfus immediately denied it. No, that's not it. Its expression grew more serious. Worst-case scenario is that all the students and professors will be wiped out. The entire hall went silent at Alfus's words. He continued, without Chiron, no one will survive, not even you. Alfus's tone was calm, measured not too fast nor too slow. Is there no possibility? Even just a 1% chance? The old man lowered his head, unable to show his expression clearly. The child gave his life for us. As the professors of this magic academy, should we try as well? Every word from Alfus made the red-robed professors lower their heads in silence. If I take responsibility and face punishment, the school won't be shut down. Then for that child, shouldn't we also be willing to make such a sacrifice, he said. That morning, the campus was as crowded as usual. In the corner of the school's infirmary, Chiron lay still on the bed. Amy and Mead kept a constant watch over him day and night. Amy gently placed her hand on his forehead. Chiron, no matter how long it takes, it could be years or even decades, she whispered, I'll wait for the day you return. Her face couldn't hide the worry and pain. But Amy kept murmuring softly, even though she was breaking down from the suffocating silence. She wiped her face with tears. Please say something, Amy begged. Chiron remained still with his eyes closed. After a while, his eyelids slowly lifted, revealing his green eyes. Chiron sat up slowly, but strangely, he was completely naked. Chiron blinked, his gaze blurry as he looked around. Where am I? He walked absent-mindedly, but suddenly something clicked. He remembered. The memory rushed back. He was holding the girl in his arms, falling off a cliff to save everyone. At that moment, he had unleashed his immortality to its fullest extent. He raised his hand and observed it. Is this the afterlife? It seemed like he still hadn't forgot the memories from his previous life. Then something caught his attention. But why? Shirone stood alone in the vast emptiness. No matter where he went, the scenery remained the same. It felt like all of his senses were numb. He took one step after another, his mind racing. Don't tell me. My foot just stepped on something. Shirone had stepped onto an invisible staircase. Suddenly, he froze. I knew it. He was still as lost as before, just like at the beginning. His face was blank, and distance seemed non-existent. He thought to himself that he was waving at a doppelganger far away. People can only measure distance if there are two objects to serve as reference points. The doppelganger disappeared, and he began searching frantically. If one of those reference points doesn't exist, then the concept of distance disappears and space can't form. Chiron glanced around and thought, that means no matter where I go here, it's like I'm not going anywhere. Then a voice spoke up, excellent. I didn't expect you to understand the meaning of space. I knew you had the right to come here. Chiron frowned, looked up, and asked, who's that? Am I dead? His eyes widened as a small hole of bright light appeared above him, surrounded by many colorful rays. The growing power around him was so intense that he had to raise his hand to shield his eyes from the blinding light. The force seemed to cover the entire space, and he was both amazed and confused. Whoa! From within the magical aura, two legs appeared. A beautiful girl with blue hair stepped forward. She walked up to Chiron and spoke, I've been waiting for you. Chiron, or more precisely. Chiron, still confused, asked, who are you? The girl with blue hair smiled softly. I am. She placed a hand over her chest and introduced herself. I am the goddess. On the 5th day after Chiron's death, outside the quiet campus, sunlight streamed down onto the school's roof tiles. Due to the recent tragedy, the professors had decided to delay all recovery measures. However, the students were not happy about it. In the student council room, students sat in observation. Behind them, a blackboard read, do you agree with the recovery measures the professors believe are appropriate after today's meeting? Yes. No. The students felt as though the principal, whom they had trusted so much, had betrayed them. Suddenly, a young man with dark hair slammed his hand on the table and shouted, everything that's happening now started from a mistake the principal made 40 years ago. He stood at the bottom of the room, facing the student council, and continued, the accusations against the principal need to be addressed on another day, as Chiron's funeral must be postponed too. They're just trying to avoid taking responsibility. Amira, the president of the student council, a second-year student, clasped her hands in frustration and said, the student council definitely has to step in on this matter. The entire room erupted in agreement, chanting, yes, yes, the principal must take responsibility for what happened. Punish him. Punish him. Suddenly, a hand shot up in opposition. Hold on. Everyone's misunderstanding. Shirelle stood up and responded. I'm Shirelle from Class 5. Everyone's assuming Chiron is gone for good, but that's not the whole truth. She explained Chiron's heart stopped beating, but his body hasn't decomposed yet, which has caused all this gossip. Is that true? Is that really what's happening? Shirelle went on, the professors made their decision based on this uncertainty. Amira quickly pressed for clarification. Is that true? Shirelle, if he's not dead, then why did his heart stop? Shirelle closed her eyes in deep thought. Amira urged her on, please, tell us the details. Why? Shirelle's face was firm, her hands crossed in front of her chest as she replied, the result of unlocking the immortality ability. Her eyes widened as she analyzed, immortality is a concept that doesn't directly affect a person's life, and the professors are still discussing it. The room fell silent and her voice became hesitant. It's a mysterious topic. So, before she could finish, murmurs broke out among the students below. What is this immortality ability? I heard it's the highest level a mage can achieve. Level? But is it magic created by knowledge? So, if it is. Suddenly, she was struck with shock and fear by the whispers below, sweat dripping down her face as it turned pale. She thought to herself, asterisk, wait, why are they reacting like this asterisk? At this moment, Amira was also deep in thought. Asterisk, it's a mysterious topic. Isn't the second innate talent of wise mages to make decisions after carefully thinking through a problem multiple times? Asterisk. Shirelle glanced around in panic, suddenly understanding. She thought of the children. Asterisk, we're still not mages, just students. Asterisk, the younger kids would only accept what they could truly see and feel. She couldn't stop imagining the rebellious students who disliked the principal and the older students who were biased because of their hatred for the principal. They didn't have the luxury of rational thinking. What did this have to do with those accusations? Shirelle imagined the scene where the principal was arrested and Chiron was lying in a coffin full of flowers, that he was going to be buried. With this kind of situation, she'd be holding her head and crying, thinking they were going to bury Chiron. What should I do? She wondered. Suddenly, a voice spoke up, coming from an arm raised in the air. I'm Mark, from 7th grade. Mark's eyes were full of anger. He shouted, the school's honor comes from its students. If people hear rumors about our school having an unreliable teacher, they'll lose trust in us too. Mark placed his hand on his chest, his voice softening. However, we all know who helped us understand what it means to be a true magician. The students in the crowd started to realize what he was saying. Mark continued, with those large, wrinkled hands guiding our small ones forward, the person who showed us love and care. The image of the principal playing with the children appeared in everyone's minds when we were still young. The people below began to change their minds. That's right, it taught us to become who we are today. Mark's voice continued to echo. Even though the principal had made a mistake in the past, Mark boldly said, I don't think we need to go against the teachers we hold in such high regard. Shirelle looked at him with shining eyes, admiration in her gaze. That's right, Mark. If logic doesn't work, we'll appeal to their emotions. The girl sitting next to Amira noticed her tapping on the desk. With a distant look in her eyes, Amira seemed to be deep in thought. If they voted now, the result would be a tie, 5 against 5. The board was filled with writing, and the students below were restless. Some were crying, while others were laughing and joking around. What's the accusation? Please forgive the teachers. It seemed like the kids in this beginner class had too many expectations. That's why I said we need to separate them. Amira's head was spinning. If we keep going like this, they won't press any charges. What should I do? A hand shot up, and a voice called out. Ardino Fermi, first year. A guy stood up, and all eyes turned to him. Shirelle whispered, Ha! Why is Fermi standing up? He stood up and bowed. Everyone, I forgot to mention something important. We owe our lives to Chiron. Is there anyone here who isn't sad that he sacrificed himself for us? The students' faces turned serious, making Shirelle look over her shoulder, worried. Fermi's words made Shirelle uneasy as she shifted uncomfortably in front. That's why we shouldn't keep opposing this. Fermi, with a cold look on his face, called out, For the savior of our lives, we must fight to honor Chiron's spirit. Shirelle tensed up and shouted back, Wait, honor his spirit? Chiron isn't dead. Fermi calmly responded, Isn't he? From what I know. He flashed a cold smile. People are using chemicals to preserve Chiron's body. If she's still alive, then why would they do that? The whole room was shocked. Amira asked, Is that true, Fermi member? Then she turned to accuse Shirelle. Shirelle, do you know about this? She tried to stay calm in the face of the accusation. Please tell us, Shirelle. She trembled, tears streaming down her face. I refuse to provide information that would implicate me. She thought to herself, I'm sorry, Amy. Amira immediately waved her hand. Now we will begin the vote. But she predicted the votes would be in her favor. Shirelle silently cursed. It's all that bastard Fermi's fault. Outside on the school grounds, a group of students protested. Resign, Alfus, submit to interrogation. Leading the charge was Amira shouting, Start the funeral for Chiron now. Stop preserving the body of the deceased. Amy and Bede, watching from the observation room below, were caught off guard. This is bad. Alfus used magic on Chiron's body, looking gloomy. It seems they've realized we're using magic to slow her down. The old man's face showed a brief moment of sadness. We don't have much time left. God? Chiron found himself once again standing before God. God spoke gently, Do you not believe me? Just as the things humans create reflect human thoughts and forms, everything I have made carries my own traits. Therefore, you resemble me the most, Chiron. He was stunned, lost in thought. God calmly extended her hands, calling out to him with a soft, serene voice. Her beautiful face, eyes like drops of water, and long, gentle hair spoke. Will you create a world with me? Chiron hesitated, stepping back slightly. What? He stammered, his confusion clear, with me. It suddenly dawned on him that he was completely naked. Flushing with embarrassment, he instinctively tried to cover himself with his hands, hurriedly adding, I'm sorry. This is all so sudden. I'm not that kind of person, okay? He was so embarrassed that his words were barely understandable, sweat pouring down his back. God chuckled, amused by his cute awkwardness. With a wave of her hand, she conjured a set of clothes for him and said, Don't be shy. This isn't your world. Her eyes narrowed as she smiled, adding, Your body still exists in your world. Chiron fell silent, looking up, lost in thought. He hesitated to look at the girl who claimed to be a goddess and spoke. I knew it. Is this a different world? The goddess raised one hand to her side, slightly tilting her head as she answered, No, this is a place different from where you live. She held out her index finger right in front of him, with a tiny round black dot at the tip. One dot represents a dimension without sound or surface, a small black dot in the middle of a vast, empty space. As he looked closer, he realized the dot wasn't as small as he first thought. From the outside, it seemed like there was no space at all, but as he zoomed in, he could clearly see that there was space inside where Shirone was standing, talking to the goddess. But in reality, it was all condensed. He looked down at his hands and quietly thought, a dot with a distance between my two hands. In other words, my body exists in 3 dimensions, and while I look at my hands and speak, there's a 3-dimensional world inside a dot. The goddess smiled gently and commented, your perspective is quite unique. From an angle where his view of the goddess's expression was unclear, she confidently stated, that's right, it's the nature of time and space. Even a world seen from afar looks like a dot. She brought the dot on her fingertip closer to her eyes, then looked directly at it. But if you get closer, it's an endless world. Shirone froze for a moment. The goddess is the one who created that world. What do you think? He stayed silent for a while before asking, I can't go back, can I? The goddess looked at Shirone, puzzled, then replied, you can't? Don't you want to stay? If you're feeling regretful, he immediately interrupted her, denying it. That's not it. I understand very clearly. Shirone hesitantly spoke up, can I ask one more question? God smiled and replied, of course. Shirone's pupils narrowed. He asked, why are you lying? This question from Shirone seemed to strike a nerve with God. She was extremely surprised. The water beneath her feet rippled slightly. After a moment of silence, she finally spoke, God doesn't lie, there's no need to lie. God's eyelids drooped, yet the familiar smile still lingered on her lips, because if I believe it doesn't exist, then it won't exist. Shirone's face darkened, his eyes grew cold, you're lying again. Even this one simple sentence caused God's expression to change. Her gaze lost the brightness it had earlier. Shirone suddenly asked, are you really God? God remained silent for a moment before her sharp eyes slowly rose. She spoke as if realizing there had been a misunderstanding, explaining that their definitions of God were different. I will show you what God is. Shirone stood silently waiting. The scene shifted to a small village nestled between countless rolling hills. Under a clear sky, gentle sunlight bathed the villagers as they harvested ripened rice with sickles. Near the corner of a house, 2 women stood in the shade, chatting. Children ran to the fields, eager to catch dragonflies. Everything around Shirone appeared so real. He stood there, lost in wonder, as though he were truly seeing it for the first time. This world was a perfect replica. He turned his head to look at where the Lord was standing. She was holding a sphere in her arms. However, I could shift that farmer. One hand lifted the sphere, while the other rested on top of it, pointing at the farmer from the small village. The Lord's 2 fingers slowly pierced through the outer layer of the sphere, which was also the sky in this mirrored world. At the same time, where Shirone stood, a large shadow suddenly appeared and covered his body. From his point of view, looking up at the high sky, he could see how much the Lord's 2 delicate fingers had been magnified. Those 2 fingers grasped the back of the farmer's shirt and lifted him up into the air. Finally, they dropped him down in front of a horse that was eating hay. In the distance, the Lord stood a little away from Shirone and said, the space has changed, which means time has changed as well. The Lord lifted the sphere in her palm, because time and space are one. Shirone suddenly muttered 2 words, time, space. The Lord immediately agreed. Exactly. A hand lifted the knight's piece, and something similar existed in your world. Right? If you move a knight in your world, the knight that was lifted just now is now placed somewhere else. 1 turn of time is passed on the board, meaning you are manipulating time and space, and the lower dimension is called the chessboard. Shirone looked at the Lord's back as she spoke, and she said, the Lord is not the unbeatable, superhuman being that your faith makes her out to be. On the golden rice field, dragonflies fluttered through the blue sky. They were just designers capable of creating a dimension with a lower level than where they existed. At some point, the footsteps of God had come close to the farmer, but the creatures they created believed that God was an absolute entity. God stood behind the farmer, watching his back and speaking, because they have power that the creatures can never possess, and God can manipulate them without them even knowing. The farmer's face was exaggerated. It was just a piece of wood with 2 holes drilled for eyes. The farmer didn't know how he had moved, nor did he know that this world was a replica. He showed a terrified expression when he heard these words from God. God smiled, his bright blue eyes looking at Shirone. There was only one way to make him understand. Shirone's pupils contracted, his brows furrowed, and a drop of sweat rolled down his cheek. In horror, Shirone whispered, the power of immortality. God placed a hand on the farmer's shoulder. That's right. Immediately, a spell was activated. God tilted his head, watching as the farmer slowly began to fade into sparkling particles. That was the power of immortality. Shirone and the Lord both tilted their heads upward, watching the shimmering particles rise into the sky. The Lord spoke again, the ability of immortality is a sense that shapes the entire world. The glittering particles continue to trail after each other, climbing higher into the deep blue sky. They scattered across different corners of the heavens, but in the end, they were stopped by the glass surface of the sphere. The Lord held the sphere gently in the palm of their hand, and for a moment, their beautiful face took on a mysterious, almost otherworldly expression. Even so, the farmer's world was still trapped inside this glass sphere. He could not comprehend the higher dimensional reality. Chiron stared at the glass sphere in fear. "Do you understand now?" the Lord asked. "I brought you someone who has used the ability of immortality and almost torn apart in the process to this place." Chiron stayed silent for a moment, warily eyeing the Lord before finally asking, "What do you want from me?" The Lord responded as they used magic on the sphere. The glass sphere transformed into a small black dot under the influence of the Lord's magic. Chiron couldn't take his eyes off. A drop of sweat rolled down the corner of his eye, just one. "Step into the timeline I've created, Chiron," the voice continued, "and create another timeline." The timeline, starting from one small point, gradually expanded and transformed into another smaller point, and within that, another timeline. And it would keep repeating over and over again. God looked up at the vast starry sky, smiling brightly. It will become a perfect universe. This is what we call the matrix of timelines. Meanwhile, Chiron's face darkened. He didn't say anything. He just stood there, silently listening. Suddenly, Chiron spoke. "I can't." God raised an eyebrow. "Why not?" "I'm sure you have no reason to refuse." God asked again, "You don't like my proposal?" Chiron slightly lowered his head before answering, "It's not bad. I think becoming God to create a new world sounds good. And your plan to create a perfect universe. It also sounds okay." Chiron's gaze suddenly sharpened. "But if I enter your timeline, someone else like me will have to sacrifice." God's emerald eyes darkened, but a glint of light flashed from the shadows of his face. He raised a finger, speaking in a commanding tone, "I won't give you a choice. If you refuse, I'll tear you apart." Chiron's expression remained firm, unwavering. "I won't do it." The goddess said, "We'll know soon enough." At the same time, she cast a spell to attack him, causing the water around them to ripple violently. She maintained her stance while casting the magic, her face showing no sign of guilt, as if she had done nothing wrong. But that calm expression quickly faded, replaced by a look of surprise. "Now I understand." On the other side of the water, Chiron stood there completely unharmed. Not a single wound or scratch on his body. His hair was fluttering, and his eyes shone with a blue light. It was like a time-space matrix, just like the one the god had mentioned, almost like a divine domain. Chiron raised one hand in front of him, then lifted his other hand high, activating his own magic. Her divine domain. Chiron aimed a red magic at the girl who claimed to be the goddess. At the same time, his gaze was more determined than ever. He was confident that she was a sorceress. Chiron stood there confronting her. She slowly stepped back and added, "Chiron, don't do something you'll regret." He remained where he stood, lost in thought, unsure of her true intentions. The goddess remained silent for a moment before starting to cast magic around herself. "Do you think you could defeat me?" Chiron, deep in thought, was genuinely concerned about the situation. Asterisky definitely can't win. She's someone who's reached the level of calling herself a goddess, Arcane. No, maybe she's even stronger than a goddess, Asterisk. Anyway, no matter what, he was certain about his choice and firmly stated, "This isn't a place to stay." Chiron recalled the image from earlier of the goddess with the man he had observed. When the farmer unlocked the power of immortality, his body disappeared without a trace. "But she had my body existing in another world. So I can return, right?" Chiron asked. The goddess answered his question. "Yes, you can return. However, there's no way you'll succeed. You'll just die again." She was trying to convince Chiron to reconsider, but he stubbornly refused and made up his mind not to turn back. "Then I'll still try," he said. The goddess pondered for a moment. Catching it isn't the problem. The issue is its maximum energy. The goddess nervously glanced at the red light energy in the palm of Chiron's hand. "If that's the case, this space will be destroyed." After thinking for a moment, she began to use her powers. Chiron appeared quite worried, unsure of what she was planning to do. The goddess raised her arm, creating a black hole that sucked the red energy from Chiron's hand into it. Meanwhile, water began flooding the ground from nowhere. After casting the spell, she continued speaking. "This place is a crossroads of space and time. The moment you step through, you will experience the journey you've already taken to get here, but in reverse." Chiron was still doubtful that the goddess would really let him go. "Are you really going to let me return?" But before he could leave, she set one condition. "Promise me this. If you fail to return to your original world, you must come back here and follow my instructions." Chiron still had doubts and was filled with anxiety, unsure if he would truly make it back. "I spoke again. You won't succeed." He looked at the gate back to the deep, endless darkness. He turned and thanked the goddess. "Thank you for letting me return." "It's too soon to thank me," she replied. "It's not easy for a pure and sacred being to return to a complicated physical body, let alone one as flawed as a human body." The goddess, in some rare act of kindness, reminded Shirone before he left. "If you can make it through, you will become something strange, no longer human. If you want to give up, come back this way." She still hoped Shirone would reconsider and stay, but he was firm. "I won't give up. Goodbye." He slowly stepped through the gate, ready to return to his own body. Safe travels! The goddess gave her final blessing to Shirone as he set off. He moved step by step, slowly advancing toward the gate. Inside the gate was pitch black, and he fumbled his way forward. "If I go through this way, I can return," he thought to himself. Shirone continued walking, undeterred by the darkness around him. Despite the heavy blackness, he kept moving forward without paying attention to anything else. The darkness enveloped everything, leaving him wandering aimlessly. Eventually, he realized in a panic and looked around. This place looked exactly like the white room from earlier. When he looked back, he was confused to see the gate still there. The goddess was still standing there, watching him. She now fell silent, thinking to herself, looking back now, there were so many strange things. Why did she give up on me so easily? He remembered the goddess's earlier words, "You won't succeed." Chiron was filled with panic as he realized he had fallen into the goddess's trap. He was trapped in a timeless prison. Then a memory surfaced. It was from 2 months ago when he was at Uncle Armin's house. Yes, Chiron was the embodiment of stasis. Uncle Armin's image began to appear and he spoke to him. Chiron is in a classroom scene with everyone frozen in place. If it's the spell of stasis, then it's one of the highest level magics where time slows down faster than the speed of light. Are we moving at the speed of light? You're a smart kid. Exactly. So when it happens, time itself seems to stop. He looked up at the sky and continued, "The light is quite strange, with stars flying across the sky. The light can make a mage faster. After a certain point, the stars fly even faster, and an infinite color appears behind them. They can even catch up with time. That infinite star circles the earth. That's the foundation of the spell to stop time." Back in the present, after absorbing the knowledge from Master Armin's words, Shiro began to think deeply. If this is a space-time trapped within the speed of light, I can escape. With that realization, he opened his eyes. If I'm faster than the speed of light, but how? Superluminal speed, speed that only exists in theory, something that's not real. Suddenly, the words of the goddess sparked an idea for Chiron. The moment you step in, you'll experience the process you went through to get here, but in reverse. He slowly stood up. I get it now, he thought. I'll use purple magic, the power of immortality. Chiron positioned himself, preparing to race. The speed at which immortality spreads across the universe is instantaneous. Right now, I'm just a soul without a body, so I'm not sure if going faster than light is even possible. Destruction. His gaze was full of determination and confidence. Even though he knew he might fail, he had to try. I won't give up. He started racing against the light. Chiron moved incredibly fast, leaving a long streak of purple light behind him. He succeeded. His soul sped up so quickly that all you could see were the purple lights moving. I could already see his body lying motionless on the bed. His soul was racing toward it, following a long streak of purple light, heading back to his body, the place where I was before, the place where my friends were. His body lay on the bed with a hand focused on healing magic. The one performing the healing was Headmaster Alfus. Now let's switch back to the real world. 8 days after Chiron's death, Headmaster Alfus sat by the bed, watching over Chiron's body. Behind him were Sina, Ethella, and Mead. Aruki was sitting in a chair waiting anxiously, while Amy stood leaning against the doorframe. Suddenly, Shirelle spoke up, catching Amy's attention. Look over there. Outside, someone was raising a petition and making a scene. On behalf of the students of Alphea's Magic Academy, we are submitting this petition to all the professors. A crowd had gathered, causing a commotion, and at the front of it was a white-haired girl, the student council president, Amira. She demanded that Headmaster Alpheus turn himself in. She was interrogated by the Magic Association. The students who hadn't participated in the protest voiced their concerns, saying, "Senpai, please stay calm." Sena, filled with anger, pushed the door open and confronted them. Why is the student council inciting others and causing chaos in the school? The white-haired girl stepped forward, holding up a piece of paper and raising her voice. No one is inciting anything. We didn't want it to go this far, but Chiron has been dead for 8 days now. Why hasn't there been any announcement? Chiron fell into a coma, and it only counts as a coma if the person's heart is still beating. You can't fool us by saying his body hasn't decayed yet. Is that really enough to avoid punishing the principal? We even have Chiron's death as proof, but the school doesn't want to collapse over something like this. She apologized for deceiving them, but this was the best decision the teachers could come up with, and they would take responsibility for it. Can the teachers really take responsibility for their actions? The white-haired girl thought, feeling tense. Why would she say something like that? Is there something we've missed? What's going on? I've read the whole report. It seems like she's hesitating. Nearby, Furby stood quietly, giving her a serious look, and thought, Amira. She was going to join the parade and would cause a lot of trouble if she turned her back. To be more precise, it would mess up her plans. In his eyes, there was a clear sense of calculation, and I didn't want to get dragged into it. He smiled kindly and suggested, let's do it this way. Let us see Chiron's condition. We'll decide what to do after we see him for ourselves. Hearing this, Sina snapped angrily, you can't allow that. Wait until everything's settled. The crowd seemed to get stirred up by her words. No way, how can we trust you? Go inside, we have the right to know. We're fighting for our school. Maria and a few others tried to stand up and stop them, but the crowd shoved them aside. You can't do this. Luckily, Mark caught Maria before she fell and yelled, you people have gone too far. Another student's life is in danger. The crowd kept pushing forward, not hesitating anymore. Suddenly, a dark figure shot out from the treatment room where Shirone was, smashing through the window, leaving everyone below stunned. The person landed right in front of the building entrance, blocking the crowd from charging in. It was Need. He stood at the door, his body surrounded by lightning magic energy, and said, fine, go ahead and come in if you want. But if that's the case, then you'll die. He gave off a deadly glare, promising to strike anyone down who dared to step forward and break through into the building. At this moment, the students in the courtyard split into two groups, one protesting and the other trying to stop them. Amira, clearly confused, spoke up, What? What are you talking about? She looked a little stunned, her expression forced as she asked, Need, we've been good to you because you've done things for us and this is how you talk to your seniors. The people around her wore similarly angry expressions. Need straightened up, his body radiating a force like small thunderbolts. He spoke sternly, Should I repeat myself? The power around him grew stronger and enormous energy spread out in all directions. Seeing this, those facing him began to tremble, their faces filled with disbelief. One of them exclaimed, Wait, no way. That's... Amira's face also went pale. No way. With a burst of overwhelming magic and bolts of lightning surrounding him, Need's classmates gasped in surprise, whispering, That's plasma magic. They wondered, isn't he just a fifth year? Even at our school, only Raken, a first year, could use that. His teammates were standing high up, watching their faces filled with panic. Amy exclaimed, That's real destructive magic. Cheryl responded, He hid this magic. Only Aruki could have known this would happen. He stood with his arms crossed in a quarter, deep in thought. So, you finally used that magic. Seeing Need struggle to hold on made him reflect. Though he knew what would happen if Need went through with it, Shirone wasn't dead. Need's face gradually twisted with uncontrolled rage and a threatening glare. I will kill all of you trash if you touch Shirone. Meanwhile, Shirone lay in bed, a wave of purple energy approaching him. Deep down, he felt like he was returning to a place with people he knew. Suddenly, small sparks like mischievous flames appeared. A hand reached out from the purple energy, as if trying to touch the sparks. Then, an image of Chiron's body appeared. In a translucent form, he was struggling to escape, because Shirone knew something was clinging to him. Voices echoed in his head, causing him intense pain as he clutched his head and collapsed. A voice rang out in his mind, What is this? As Shirone held his face, the voice continued, Rebirth, the lowest existence. Hearing this, his eyes widened in realization. The voice echoed again, Humans always have a strong will to survive. Shirone seemed to understand it all now, so that's it. He remembered the words the Lord had spoken. It wasn't easy to merge something pure with a spiritual entity to return to a complex physical body, more so one filled with the disgusting elements of humanity. He recalled those words, and now they existed in his mind. What she said, he couldn't bear to scream. No, I will return. That voice echoed around him again. Return where? There's no place waiting for you. When the voice spoke again, the only thing waiting for you is death. This triggered Chiron's anger. He shouted furiously. Shut up! He tried to run toward his body, avoiding the streaks of red light. I will return to my world. He raised his hand, leaning forward, and yelled, Stay away from me. At that moment at the school, Amiro was harshly criticizing Need. Why can't you accept that your friend is dead, you foolish junior? With that, her eyes gleamed, her hands clenched as she used magic, creating a thick black smoke that enveloped the space around them. This was a weather magic that could absorb. The people behind her were also readying their spells, their eyes glowing as well. Need, do you really think? The sky was filled with bubbles. He looked up, and just then, Amira's voice rang out again. Do you think you can defeat all of us? Suddenly, footsteps were heard, followed by a voice. Ha 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 ha, I can't believe you just walked into a battle you can't even control. Aruki walked slowly over to him and asked coldly, Do you need my help? Need jumped in surprise and called out Aruki's name. He glanced at him before questioning. You think Shirone is dead? Then he shouted angrily, aren't you on their side? The others around them froze and whispered, what is he talking about? But Aruki calmly responded, of course not, I just. His expression suddenly became determined as he looked at the group ahead and continued, I don't want them to have their way and take Chiron. Amira, growing increasingly frantic, screamed and gritted her teeth in fury, shouting, you bastards. Meanwhile, Chiron was still unconscious lying on the bed. A voice sounded nearby. It seemed. Alfus was looking down sadly before speaking. Looks like this is the end. Amy, startled by his words, turned to him confused. What do you mean by that? The end? Are you planning to bury Chiron? She couldn't believe it and pressed him. Is that really what you mean? Sena and Ethella stood beside her, their faces filled with sorrow. Alfus turned to Amy and said, Amy, look outside. He gazed through the window, where his students were preparing for battle, his heart heavy. He spoke quietly. The kids have activated deadly magic and are trying to kill each other. He hesitated before adding, if this continues, it will lead to another tragedy. Hearing this, Amy's eyes filled with tears. She grabbed Alfie's hand, stopping him. No, Shirone isn't dead. She was sobbing uncontrollably. You know that, don't you? The old man just shut his eyes and gave up, not saying a word. Amy lowered her head, tears of pain falling as she whispered the name, Chiron. Elsewhere, Fermi was silently laughing with a wicked grin. He was pleased by the chaos of the battle, feeling both excitement and fear. He looked at Need and Aruki, calculating. I'm going to be the one hunting you down. Over here, Amira was a bit worried and thought to herself, is this really happening? The students were preparing deadly magic to face off against each other. With that in mind, she suddenly spoke up. You're Aruki, the one with the genius syndrome. Aruki's expression didn't change when she heard this, and Amira continued. You're colder than anyone acting based on emotions, right? Amira then stood tall and snapped. Do you really believe Chiron is still alive? Aruki replied emotionlessly. I only have one answer. She spoke with unwavering certainty. Chiron isn't dead. Need was shocked when he heard this. What? Suddenly, Amira's face darkened and she scoffed. Is that so? She's crazy, and she's always right. I guess you prepared a logical explanation to convince us, huh? Aruki answered bluntly, of course. This response made everyone's eyes widen in disbelief. What? Aruki continued, I have evidence. Hearing that, Amira quickly responded, show us what makes you think Chiron is still alive. He began to explain. His first reason was simple. He raised his hand toward the sky. It's 4 o'clock. Well, I'll let you all figure it out. Everyone looked up at the sky in unison, their faces filled with curiosity. The bell they were thinking of seemed almost like a mystical explanation. What's going on? Need next to them was equally confused. He was counting, but while everyone was wondering what was happening, Amira spoke up, I get it. I understand now. Then she snapped and shouted loudly, we'll confirm Chiron's status ourselves, no matter what. Aruki, holding a stack of documents, raised them high. Amira's voice kept yelling, how long do you think you can stall before graduation? At that moment, Candace appeared, cutting her off. This is pretty fun, can I join? Amira growled angrily, how dare you come here so casually? Right in front of V stands Candace without a care and Aaron next to him looking annoyed. This time, I'm going to catch you, remember that. Candace didn't care, replying, go ahead if you can. Aruki was still flipping through the documents. It took him 27 seconds. Candace folded his arms, pouting, doesn't matter. Now I'm going to repay Chiron. Need watch your friend flip through all these confusing pages. Aruki remained calm. What's this? A notebook from the Lightning Dragon. Need gasped in shock, exclaiming what? Aruki responded calmly, I diagnosed Chiron's condition and sent off the samples I collected. Do you remember the time I used a knife to cut Chiron's arm? At this, Need looked horrified. Since when did you? More importantly, did you do this 5 days away from the capital? Candace stood there, watching quietly, which made Aaron beside him feel awkward. Then Amira spoke up, Lightning Dragon. What kind of scam is this? Do you really think the name Mercandane will change anything? Aruki answered without getting upset. Don't worry, I used a pseudonym. If I used my real name, my father would get harassed. Plus, don't you think what's written in this document is more important? Amira raised her voice. So what? Does it contain magic that can bring the dead back to life? Aruki didn't deny it. It's called the Analysis of Immortality Potential and Comatose State. As soon as he finished, everyone was stunned and stood frozen. Need turned to look at his friend. Aruki continued, based on the cellular analysis of the subject, the cells are in a suspended state of activity. The others in the room also leaned in, examining the documents closely. With the sample collected 24 hours after the subject's death, there's been no change in organ function. The data below. Take a look at the report based on the information we've gathered. The subject's body may be in a state of suspended activity, but we can't conclusively say that all bodily functions have ceased. The whispers around Amira made her feel anxious. What's the difference? Does this mean he's not dead? Aruki continued analyzing. The lightning dragon had classified 3 types of circulatory failure. First, complete cessation of heart function. Second, temporary suspension of heart function. When he mentioned 3 hearts not working, but in a state that seems like they've stopped, Amira turned pale, shocked, and unable to believe it. Wait, the third one doesn't make sense. His hand flipped through the papers rapidly. This is important. Listen closely. An image of a heart appeared, and he explained, while it's possible to observe a creature with a stopped heart, based on an immoral dead body, there could be 2 new cases. In front of everyone, he calmly said, Case 1, if the autonomic functions are delayed for a special reason, until the brain reaches a conclusion, the body might temporarily stop its functions. And Case 2, even if the subject's autonomic functions have ended. Aruki, holding a clock, continued, It's possible the observer's sense of time might differ, and yet the body functions might still seem normal. At this point, Amy sighed in relief and leaned against Sherelle. He explained that an outsider couldn't observe this activity due to a barrier in space and time. Still flipping through documents, he added. Based on magical logic, the subject slides through, well, anyway. Amira was terrified by Aruki's convincing words. Lying in the recovery room, Arian Shirone's eyes were full of worry. The last page of the document bore a red stamp. Aruki concluded with a final sentence. This can't be considered as death. When had needs tears fallen? Aruki asked, Well, did I find it? His face was bright with a hopeful smile, and he said, I found a way to bring the dead back to life.